In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic, founded by Dr. Tom Coen, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowen's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. Takota Coen was born and raised on a 250-acre regenerative farm in Alberta, Canada. In 2012, he quit his career as a carpenter when he realized that humanity was heading towards a dystopian nightmare and dedicated his life to help change that trajectory. In the years since, he realized the best way to fight the nefarious agents destroying our world is not with pandemonium, petitions, or pouting, but by ending our own dependency on the systems that keep us sick, broke, and enslaved. He is a farmer, author, and co-founder of Building Your Homestead, a company whose mission is to help others to peacefully exit the increasing tyranny of our world and start building a parallel economy, one homestead at a time. You can find more about their homestead design services, mentorship, and free resources in the show notes, or go to www.buildingyourhomestead.com. His book, Building Your Permaculture Property, a 5-step process to design and develop land. This is it right here, right?
Yeah.
Same one? Okay, good. This book right here is available on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. Okay, so Takota, thank you for being here, man. Coming all the way from Canada.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, it's an honor. When you interviewed me, I immediately knew that I was like, I got to interview that guy. And then I've also become pretty close with Curtis Stone, and he's like one of your biggest fans. So I'm like, all right. He's like, I think you guys are the same age. And then you just confirmed that. So I'm like, okay, I definitely got to interview this guy. So you grew up on an organic farm, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start there and tell me what that was like.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm one of the most privileged people in the world. Like, it was just idyllic, the background that I grew up in. My parents made the transition from industrial farming to organic farming in the 1980s. So before the internet, before organic, you couldn't buy organics in the store. Literally, my mom got sick one day taking my dad lunch in the field while he was spraying, and she just about passed out. And then she started researching, just like looking at the labels and saying, hey, there's skulls and crossbones on the stuff that we're putting on the food and injecting into the animals. Yeah, we're done with this. So they quit cold turkey.
And there was probably very few resources at the time.
I think there was one in our county. There was one other farmer who he also got cancer, which again, with the German new medicine stuff.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's a tough one.
Whether it's
Dakota's a big fan of German new medicine as well.
Fan.
So we'll talk about that. There's still acute poisoning though.
Absolutely.
In German medicine.
That's a real thing.
Yeah.
And you know, my whole family, including my mom, is hypersensitive to, you know, the chemicals and stuff like that. And anyway, so yeah, in 88, they transitioned off the industrial agricultural paradigm and started to try to stumble through how do we grow food, like the way our great grandparents did without chemicals and fertilizers and all this stuff. And they really struggled. Like I said, there was no internet, there was no resources.
Where did they start? Like what did they do at that point? They just,
honestly, it was just like they kind of followed their gut and they tried a lot of things. But I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and it was everyone else left the farm because it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
Basically, the whole family had to pull together and try.
So you got the tail end when things were already working.
All the trees, most of the trees were planted. The shit work was done. And then like from my earliest memories are like, I'm going to be a farmer. I'm going to be a farmer. But my whole life was, you can't make money farming. So I was never directly, discouraged from being a farmer, but it was just assumed that you can't be a farmer. So you have to do something else, make money. And then like there's a joke in farming. If you want to how do you make $1 million farming? You start with 2 million and you try really hard. And so, yeah, then after I graduated high school, I kind of woke up to how shitty the world was.
Were you already kind of awake before that, though?
I was probably a voluntarist since I was about 14.
Yeah.
But I had no idea how like deep it was, and I was not sheltered, just busy with school and exams and sports and girls.
Were you homeschooled or
no? I went to a small country school. And
okay, but I mean that's like
basically it was homeschool.
Okay, that's what I was going to say.
I was best friends with all my teachers. Yeah. There's like 30 some kids in my class. It was honestly like, if I could, when I have kids, if I could have sent them to the school that I went to, I would.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. I'll be homeschooling my kids when I have them. But so once I got out of high school and started taking carpentry and as a trade, I just had time in the evenings to like that doesn't line up. I'm going to research that. I'm going to research, and then just went down the rabbit hole and went deep into Alex Jones and all the deep dark holes of what's possible. And then eventually it was like farming fixes all of this.
Yeah.
It's the foundation of civilization. Like we have to, without feeding ourselves, we can't, specialize into other, skilled trades and everything else. And so I just kind of found my way back to the farm, moved back in 2012 full time, and then started researching. Like my parents struggled for 30 years organic, and we still saw a decline in the health of our land, even though they weren't spraying the chemicals and doing all the stuff. And so it's like, hey, someone else has to figure this out. So one day I just literally started searching like alternative agricultural systems and found stuff like permaculture, holistic management, Korean natural farming, biodynamics. And I just went hard into that for quite a few years, took a bunch of courses, read a lot of books, started experimenting with stuff on our own farm, made a ton of mistakes. And really in the last 5 years, things have started to take off, and like our land's coming back, the yields are increasing, work's decreasing, species are coming back. It's so incredible.
What were some of the things that, as your parents transitioned from industrial toxic farming practices, which I would imagine were largely like monocrop as well?
Yeah. Monocrop, full synthetics, full chemicals, fertilizer.
Got it. What were some of the things that they had to implement at first? Well, okay, let's say this. What were some of the things that were successful that they implemented to get it to the state that it was when you also took over to then expand upon that?
Honestly, I don't have a very favorable view of organic farming. And my parents don't either, particularly today. So we used to be certified organic when it meant something.
Yeah.
Now
that's where I thought
you can pretty much do anything.
Right.
And it's certified organic is a brand.
Yep.
And if you are part of the club or whatever, you can petition to have the brand standards changed.
And correct me if I'm wrong, USDA organic, you can spray the soil with synthetic fertilizers as long as the seeds are not in the ground yet, and then we put the seeds in.
I haven't heard that, but I have heard that you can spray Roundup on pathways, like say in a greenhouse setting, you can spray Roundup on the path, but not on the crop.
Yeah.
And that's allowed.
And it's still considered USDA
Or so,
organic.
for example, if you're an organic farmer and you can't find certified organic seed, as long as you can just show, hey, I looked, I couldn't find it, you can buy whatever seed you want.
And still counted as certified organic.
Still counted as certified. So the standards are like, in order to be certified organic, you can have your chickens in a barn, and as long as there's 10 windows this big, that checks the box. So it's really the standards keep dropping. It's big business. Like when I do buy food that we don't grow ourselves, I look for certified organic because I do think it's better
Right,
than the
right.
alternative. But we're not certified anymore. We haven't been for years.
And
But
you don't give a shit about that at this point.
no, like in my ideal situation, my customers are my certifiers.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of farm tours. I have an open book policy with anybody who buys our food or the feed that we grow for other small farmers. And that's my favorite way to do it. And I think that's where the food system will return is you'll know your farmer.
So what were some of the things, like, since you're saying that you don't have a favorable view of organic practices, especially because it's meaningless at this point.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that when you started taking over, you had this sort of epiphany that, oh, farming is the solution to all this tyranny that you started implementing that started to work on the farm? Because it's 250 acres, right?
Yeah.
Like, I have a fourth of an acre. And even for us, and I'm doing a lot right now, and I can always name the excuses of why I can't tend to my land, but we are like growing melons and stuff like that, but we could always do better. Anyway, point being, like, 250 acres is a shit ton to manage. Like, that's a lot for a person who's not accustomed to that, let's say.
Yeah.
For you, you're looking smiling at me like, dude, that's nothing.
Yeah.
Like, this is easy.
In our area, like the average size farm is 1,000 acres.
That's insane. But how many of those are organic or permaculture principled farms?
There's actually quite a few certified organic farms in our area. There's the odd kind of permaculture or regenerative farm that's becoming more popular for sure. But yeah, it's kind of like permaculture and regenerative farming is like organic farming was 30 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. So what were some of the things that you implemented when you took over to help, like, make your yield better and make the farm healthier and fill some of these gaps?
Yeah. So with organic farming, you're basically just replacing synthetics, fertilizers, and herbicides and stuff like that with organic approved ones. So like it's still the same mindset. There hasn't been a paradigm shift. You're still bringing in inputs. You're still you're either using certified organic approved pesticides and herbicides, or you're using tillage. And it's still very reductionist. There are a lot of monocultures. So
quick fix, not getting to the root cause.
Your chickens are here, your pigs are here, your grains over there. Versus, the regenerative farming or permaculture farming it's all about, you're trying to mimic natural ecosystems. So there are no monocultures in nature. There are no inputs in natural systems. They're actually, you can, see abandoned highways that are turning back into forest, right? And so the key principle behind kind of, regenerative and permaculture agriculture is like, how do we partner with that force in the universe that can take a concrete road and in the matter of a few years, like, start to break it up and turn it back into a productive ecosystem?
Beautiful.
And that's it. It's just like you comprehend that and you mimic that for whatever your context is anywhere in the world. There are, species and organisms that you can work with, but the overall pattern is the same everywhere.
So what did that look like for you, partnering with that natural innate intelligence that is permeating all of nature?
Honestly, it's been like the most just inspiring. Like, some people call it God, great spirit, whatever. I call it just nature.
Yeah.
And it's the most powerful force in the universe. Like, if you believe in, or whether you believe in evolution or, the Big Bang or creation, at some point, nothing on this planet existed. And, according to, the scientific theory, that we've gone through 5 or 6, catastrophic, basically 75 to 80% of all the species on planet Earth have been wiped out. And yet it keeps coming back better and better and better. And so to see that force that, normally you would think would take, thousands or millions of years, improve in like a couple seasons or even 10 years. Like, I'm really just starting to figure this stuff out. Like, we've been organic since the 80s. We started playing around with, regenerative stuff in 2012, but really in the last 5 years, it's like, I got it. Like, I know if I do this, I'm going to get this result.
What did you do differently?
So we've massive increase in biodiversity.
Okay.
Of from trees to the grasses that we put in our pastures to the, we used to plant one grain in a field. Now we're planting 15 species of grain in the same field. And we found ways to, harvest that and combine it and feed it to our livestock. basic principles of soil health. It's like, if you go into a forest, what are the conditions of the soil like? It's covered. There's always something growing in it. There's a diversity of, fauna and flora that are growing through it. And just like, okay, so how do I apply that in my garden? How do I apply that in my cropland? How do I apply that in my pastures? And it works. And it's like you are more drought resilient. Your yields start to improve. Like we've seen probably 3 to 4x increase in yields of some of our pastures that we've been doing the most amount of management on in just the last couple of years.
Wow.
Now we still have land that is, needs to come back.
But do you see the difference between the two?
Absolutely. Like, so when we rotate some of our herds of either our beef cows or our dairy cows from like one pasture to the other, their mineral intake on our good pastures, they basically don't eat mineral. We move them to like the next field and they're done that, and they'll, eat a whole bag in a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So are you focusing on, because I've heard this phrase that Mother Earth is modest. She likes to be covered up. Are you, I think that's from my friend Molly Englehart.
It's funny. I said that once in a permaculture course and I had a feminist get mad at me.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, I love that phrase because it implies that she likes to have cover crops. Yeah. She doesn't like to have exposed.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is we look at neighborhoods, and I'm guilty of this right now. I live in a neighborhood with an HOA, and I'm convinced that where I live relative to some parts of Austin that are like lush and green is insanely hotter. Like it is hotter where I live in my neighborhood because it's a brand new subdivision. The trees are like 4 feet tall. So there's no cover there. And then we have to manicure our lawns and keep them short. Yeah. So, we're growing some food in our backyard, but even still, that doesn't do the trick. And our neighbors just planted some fruit trees. So we're thinking about it here too. But point being, it's insanely hot where we live. And I think that's what's aiding to, quote, global warming, if anything. And I don't think global, but my point is that the elimination of the natural covering to help the earth retain its temperature, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, take your shoes off and go for a walk. Walk along the grass, then walk along bare soil, then walk along asphalt, and like you can fry eggs on bare soil.
Yeah.
The temperature difference is massive. And then now go walk on grass underneath. You guys have a lot of live oak here, which are these beautiful oaks that
they look so cool.
They're so cool.
Like,
and
they look like ancient Celtic trees to me for some reason.
They're beautiful.
So cool.
But like it hasn't been hot since I've been on my trip here. But I've done this in other places where, it'll be, so we think in Celsius, I don't know what the conversion is, but it's like, it'll be 40 degrees Celsius, in the open, just the ambient air temperature. Bare soil will be like 60, 70 degrees Celsius. And then underneath a tree, it'll be like 25. It's wild. And so, you apply that across millions of acres of land, particularly in, cities, you're going to get heat island effect. And I also don't believe in carbon-caused global warming, but I do believe in ecological damage.
Soil erosion.
Those are all real things. I've seen them. Like there are, when you're driving through the countryside and you see a fence line, there's still a barbed wire fence and it's like 3 or 4 feet higher than all the land around it. You wonder why. It's like, well, in the 30s, they couldn't till the grass right next to the fence. All the soil in between blew away.
Wow.
And that fence is left 2-3 feet out of the ground. There's places like that on my farm to this day. But what's amazing is like what took 100 years or more of degeneration, we can improve in like a decade.
Just by treating the root cause.
Yeah, just by treating the root cause. Coming back to your analogy about like Mother Nature doesn't like to show her skin. So the beautiful thing about, it's like you look at weeds. Everyone, there's all kinds of weeds, and wherever you are, there's invasive species and people have particular ones that they hate. But if you look at whatever the weeds are in your area and you look at where they're growing, because weeds will only grow in certain areas. And if you go back and figure out, okay, what happened here before, you will find that there's patterns.
Yeah.
And the patterns are the same as if I punch my skin, if I pinch my skin, if I burn my skin, if I cut my skin, if I apply dry ice to my skin, a different wound would come up. Weeds are the same way.
Different microbes too. So you could sort of look like weeds as different microbes to bioremediate.
Absolutely. And so if you compact your soil, if you till your soil, if you over salt or over fertilize, or you put toxic chemicals, like if there's a diesel spill, there's literally, you can do this. You can take, like the same area, divide it into 10 squares and do different things to the same soil, and different weeds will grow.
So does that mean that there's already the potential, or like the seed input that's already sitting in that soil, just waiting for the right?
Yeah. And
it's almost like pleomorphism with bacteria. I don't know if you've looked into that at all.
That, no.
Well, I mean, it's different than what German New Medicine describes, but German New Medicine describes different, I forget the exact term, but whatever phase of certain bacteria for certain things.
Yes.
It's the same concept. It's that pleomorphism says that bacteria and like fungi will change type, size, shape, role, depending on the pH of what it's presented with, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a theory in biodynamics, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's alchemy. And there's like, so for example, if you take a chicken and you were to like take the egg of a chicken, measure how much calcium is in that egg.
Yeah.
And then keep that chicken, that egg in a contained environment where you know exactly how much calcium is in the feed and the water, everything, and raise it in an environment. And you were to count all the eggs that chicken lays over its lifespan, it'll be like 100 times more calcium than it started with, and that was in the feed that it got over its lifespan.
Which means that there is something happening inside the chicken.
Yeah, that's taking two things and creating calcium out of nothing. And
literally alchemy.
So that force, some people call it syntropy, which is the opposite of entropy. And other people call it God, or
did you get that
alchemy.
From Schauberger, by the way?
Yes,
Syntropy, because I was going to say, because didn't he or someone else call it negative entropy, and then
probably I
don't like that. I like syntropy better.
Syntropy is the opposite of that, and so that force in the universe, syntropy, is where you can literally create something out of nothing. And like, this isn't a fringe theory now. Like, modern science is you can get DNA to form in just pure water, just in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Or they're getting matter spontaneously appearing out of nothing in a vacuum in laboratory. So, and that can seem really abstract, but then just apply it to, there's literally a pavement. You fast forward 20 years, and now there's a forest there.
Yeah. It's incredible.
It really is. And so that's the force, is like, what would it be like if we stopped fighting that force, that syntropy or ecological succession that wants to go from nothing to something? All of modern agriculture, there's a joke. It's like, modern agriculture has been ever trying to solve two problems. How do I kill this thing that wants to live? And how do I keep this thing alive that wants to die? And so what if we threw away all the sick animals and the sick plants that are just so weak that they can be propped up, and we just take the forests and the weeds and we start to cultivate them and understand what they're trying to do, and partner with that force? And it's a completely different paradigm shift. And that's basically what I went through, my parents went through, when we went from industrial to organic to regenerative. It went from how do we do less bad to how do we do more good.
Mm-hmm. You talked about Korean natural farming, biodynamics. You talked about like permaculture design. Mm-hmm. What are some of the like exact things that you implemented? Did you kind of take pieces of each of those at certain areas of your farm, or how did that work?
Yeah. So I went down the biodynamics and Korean natural farming, and I took soil food web courses and stuff like that. And what I found was nature doesn't need to be understood to work. Like you don't need to understand what kind of nematodes and bacteria and how many species of fungi you have. It's going to work no matter what.
Yeah.
So I kind of got away from a lot of the systems that are like super, nerdy into the weeds, so to speak, on understanding how to micromanage, compost teas and stuff like that. I was like, no, like this forest literally grew out of nothing. I did nothing to it. And it's the most diverse, drought-resistant, productive ecosystem on my farm. I'm just going to go in there and start asking questions like, why is the soil so good here? How do I copy that? So really basic stuff is keeping the soil mulched, or the 5 soil health principles is, keep it covered, keep a living root in the ground as long as possible, because a living root is what takes carbon from the air and puts it into the soil and feeds the whole food web. You want to have a diversity of plants. You want to have a diversity of animals. And the 5th one, and this is pretty contentious, is most people say you want to eliminate or minimize disturbance. And I say, no, you want to optimize disturbance. Death is a part of life. How do we strategically use death to feed life? So
can you give me an example?
Yeah. So in my gardens, or even in our cropland, whenever we have to till or disturb the soil to create a seed bed, we do it strategically so that we're planting immediately into that.
Got it.
We're not like the way that farming used to happen before, no-till chemical farming with Roundup and stuff like that, is farmers would typically keep a third to half of their land black or fallow all summer. And that's what they used to kill weeds.
Mm-hmm.
So half their farm was in production, the other half was just black.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what created the Dust Bowl.
Yep.
That's a terrible system. Don't do that. Then chemical farming came along, was like, well, we can just spray these certain chemicals and it'll kill these weeds. You don't have to till anymore. That is better. And the soil in those two systems the chemical one will actually be better than the full tillage system.
It's so crazy to say that. It like kills me to hear you say that, but I understand what you're saying.
So it hurt my soul to like tour through some of my neighboring farms and see like their soil is better than ours.
Wow.
That sucks.
Yeah, that does suck.
But and that's what kind of broke my whole paradigm around organics. Not using chemicals isn't enough. But so what we do is like when we have to till, we're planting immediately into it afterwards, so that any of that death and destruction that happened is now going and feeding the seeds that we've planted. So I don't use tillage to kill weeds. I use tillage to create a seed bed. Versus other people, it's like, oh, you gotta till 16 times. No, I want to go like hard and deep and fast.
So is it just once then?
As if ideally it's one.
Okay.
One really deep, hard, fast pass. Get your seeds in there right away, and they pop up. Now, if your soil has been depleted like ours has for 30 years, because we exported nutrients off of our farm and hay without putting any inputs in, it can be hard. Mm-hmm. When our ancestors got here, you could literally take a plow, go through, the prairie, flip it over, throw seeds on the ground, and you get a bumper crop of wheat. Like that's literally their tools. Like it was like a dairy cow and a shovel hooked to a rope, which they used to break up the prairies. But our soils have declined so much that we can't do that. So they need a little bit more finessing to get back to that place where we can start to do that again. Or another analogy is like if you want to live off interest from your bank account, you have to put a lot of money in, a lot of principal. Soil health is the same way, right? Like we've been depleting our savings account for a couple hundred years in North America. We can't just now stop taking money out and think that the interest that we're getting is going to be enough to sustain us. No, we have to invest back in. So doing things like rotational grazing, cover cropping, bale grazing. We are doing things like, syntropic agroforestry, where we're planting a huge diversity of fruit trees and nut trees in strategic locations to help, slow the wind down, provide shelter for our animals, in addition to providing a yield in and of itself, but also creating I call it a biological reserve, so that when we do till certain areas, there's these strips of undisturbed soil that life can spread back out into to colonize the soil.
What about like water retention in those areas too?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've built like 3 miles of swales on our property, which is basically a wetland on contour.
That's cool.
So that whenever we have excess moisture, whether rain or snow melt, that can't infiltrate into our soil, it's collected in these berms, spread across contour, slow spread and infiltrate water.
Do you use any like pumping systems to disperse water?
Yeah, so we've played around with solar and gas pumping, and eventually I want to you can get things like ram pumps or bunyip pumps, which basically use the falling water as its own pumping mechanism.
That's
so you can pump 10% of the water that's flowing back up the hill.
That's kind of similar to what Dr. Coen talks about with the heart not being a pump, but that's another that's a whole nother topic. Okay, so one thing I want to touch on before we get into like homesteading itself, because obviously that's something that a lot of people are interested in, and they know the what, they just don't know how. So I want to get there. Is this idea, and you touched on it a little bit, that the climate is changing because of CO2 emissions. And and there's even a lot of people who are into regenerative farming that say that is true, that the climate is changing because of CO2 emissions. But if we adopt regenerative practices, it helps sequester carbon back into the soil, et cetera, et cetera. And my whole take, and I'd love to hear yours, is like plants require CO2.
Yes.
So it's literally that, okay, if there is or is not a CO2 issue with the atmosphere, I don't think that is the case whatsoever. I think it's simply that the climate is, I'll say, on some level being artificially and intentionally modified by would-be bad actors. So that's a whole
Yeah.
other category. I don't want to go into like geoengineering on this.
Yeah.
We'll set that aside. But then also because of our lack of taking ownership of our own land and our own practices, et cetera, that has led to a depletion in both biodiversity and just like organic life itself, like plants, just plants and trees. So what are your thoughts on that? Especially because, like I said, a lot of regenerative farmers do say the same thing, that it is caused by carbon in the atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no evidence for it at all. And like you can look up right now online on Alibaba or Amazon CO2 generators that people are putting into greenhouses, commercial greenhouses, to help plants grow faster. So it's like even if CO2 was a problem, it creates its own solution by helping plants grow better. It's a complete non-issue.
Yeah. It's almost like absurd in a way, especially people wanting to implement carbon taxes and things. It's insane.
And so you ask, cui bono, who benefits? And it's pretty simple. Like it was like the 14th or 15th century, the king in Europe passed a window tax, which was basically like if you had the number of windows and the size of windows you had on your house was how much tax you paid. So these people are always trying to figure out how do we basically, rent seek our way through this without having to be producers and do anything. And carbon tax is just the tax du jour that's helping these people.
Yeah.
It's crazy. We live in a carbon-based life or a carbon-based planet. So think of that. Say this is a life tax. They're taxing life on this planet. Now, take another. Say it is true. Say carbon is the cause of global warming, and it's going to do all the terrible things that they say it is. Then look at the programs that they're funding to solve said problem. So in our area, you can take a forest, you can bulldoze that forest into windrows, you can pour diesel on it, and you can burn it. And the next year you can plant canola, which is basically, a crop for seed oils. It'd be like soy or corn or canola, whatever it is. And you will get a check from the government for sequestering carbon, because according to their scientists and their incentive programs, no-till, crop farming is a practice that sequesters carbon. Forests are not eligible. Rotational grazing, as of now, is not eligible. So, or all the schemes to build these giant carbon pumps that will, suck carbon out of the air and put it deep underground where it's safe. It's like, you mean a tree? Are there any government programs to help people plant trees? Which I don't believe there should be any government programs to subsidize anything.
Right. But the point is like the hypocrisy coming from them.
It doesn't make any sense. Right. So there's so many contradictions on every level.
Yeah.
But yeah, if carbon is increasing, great. It'll help us to grow more plants, which we need anyways. Now, yes, we can sequester carbon in the soils with crops. There's huge benefits to that in terms of water retention and
microbial life too, right?
Absolutely. We live in a carbon-based life planet. So the more carbon we put in the soils, the more life there's going to be. So yeah, there's so many other reasons to sequester carbon than it makes the planet warmer.
Yeah. That brings up an interesting point too, because you mentioned like what the government is considering the best ways to sequester carbon, quote, like again, as if that's the issue. But they don't subsidize or give incentives to literally just planting trees and plants that require carbon. But that brings up an interesting point. And I think the same would largely apply in Canada as it does in the US. I know in the US that a lot of farmers who are starting to realize the problems with industrial agriculture, the problems with soil health, retention, even yield. Like I remember Molly, I don't want to quote her on this, but it was something like her farm, is my friend Molly Englehart, her farm that is has adopted regenerative principles had like 14 times the yield compared to her neighbor's farm who was using industrial practices, and hers was on like a fourth of the land, which is super interesting. But for a lot of farmers who are beginning to understand this, they've already put themselves in debt with banks and have all these issues with that to where it's now almost impossible unless they get outside funding and crowdfund in a way for them to switch to organic practices because their farm will just fail. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the incentive system has been completely corrupted, and there's like I myself have gone to these agricultural lending institutions and shown them my business plan. Like we are in our area, I've seen presentations from agronomists where the net income per acre after you factor in all your expenses for most crop farmers is negative. It's just like negative, and a really good crop would be like tens of dollars per acre.
Is this involving food brokers too? Because that's a whole nother issue, right?
That'd be part of it, but to me, like that's there's nothing wrong with that. Like in a free market economy, there's always gonna be people who are going to specialize in the production and the retail of food. Yeah, if there are incentives there, it would be that those brokers can get access to cheap financing, which allows them to undercut, hold on to stuff and mess with the prices longer than they can.
Because that's what I've heard from some farmers. I don't want to get off on a segue, but that food brokers are an issue, but then also it's the distributors. I mean, there's so many barriers, and it's like in the U.S., there's a statistic, and I don't know if this is true, that farmers typically only make 10 to 15, if not less than that, cents to the dollar on their crops, which is insane, insane.
Totally, and it is that is absolutely true. And the solution for that and the funding issue is defund everything. So a lot of regenerative farmers now are clamoring for, well, give us some subsidies too, because we're helping to sequester carbon. I'm saying no, let's
stay the hell away from government.
Yeah, stay away from government. Let's fight to have an even playing field.
Yeah.
If the corn growers and the GMO sugar beet growers and the soybean, if they didn't have government subsidies, they could not be profitable, and they would just slowly fade away.
Yeah.
Let the free market economy or the free market ecosystem decide what is best for life on this planet. But coming back to the loan piece, I've gone into these agricultural lending institutions with a business plan, all the stuff, and they're making dozens of dollars per acre. Our farm is making hundreds of dollars per acre net profit, and they're just like, yeah, this is great. So what kind of canola are you going to grow? And it's like, no, I'm not. Like I've already got this business. I got a wait list for grass-fed beef and milk-fed pork and all this stuff. It's like, yeah, but pasture land's worth half as much as grain land. So if you put that grain land into pasture, you'll need to come up with 50% of the money up front in addition to the 20% down. So you need 70% down payment on $1 million quarter, so 160 acres. And otherwise we can't really work with you. But if you go in and say, I'm going to grow this canola, there's a whole infrastructure of basically insurance schemes and subsidization programs that help to prop it up. So even though their net profit isn't making a lot of money, they're basically playing a land speculation game where their land prices are going up because of inflation. They're loaning against their land, and then every year the land gets more so they can afford more debt. So this is literally just snowballing. There's no profitable industrial farm in the world that I'm aware of.
And how do you get out of that once you get in? Like, how did your parents get out of that? I mean, because it was back in the 80s?
So they were small enough. So what's interesting is, when my dad, left his family farm to buy his own land right down the road, he went to the same, egg lenders that I went to.
Crazy.
And they said, yeah, great. So, what do you want? I said, well, I'd like to buy 2 quarter sections, and here's my business plan. I said, great. So in order to buy 2 quarter sections, you'll also need to put up a hog barn, because that's where, they're trying to push at that time was hog, CAFOs basically.
Got it.
And he's like, well, I don't think there's any money in that. I just came from one. Like, I just want 2 quarters because this is my plan. Well, then we'll only fund you for 1 quarter. So they were trying to get him more in debt.
Wow.
And then basically every 15, 20 years, the market flips, hogs are down, chickens up, and then everyone goes bankrupt in hogs, and they all push them into chickens or lamb or beef or corn or whatever. And that's the game. We are literally feudal serfs.
Treated as treated
as feudal serfs. Most farmers don't own their land. Or if they do own it, it's leveraged or rehypothecated on the market so they can afford more debt, so they can, and it's just this spiral. And as soon as it's a musical chairs game, as soon as the next crash comes. So in the 30s, during the Great Depression, land prices I think dropped by it was like 4 times overnight.
Wow.
So I could potentially see that happening, or not. They could just keep printing more money until.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's so interesting about this whole thing. I followed a few different gurus who analyze the markets and have said that the crash is going to happen next month, and then it doesn't happen. I'm like, it's being artificially inflated like crazy right now. But so, yeah, how do we, let me think of where I want to go with this question, actually. How have you taken steps knowing all of that to defend against it?
Yeah. So that's a great segue. It's like, I have something called like the permaculture razor. So there's different philosophical razors.
It's like Occam's razor, except for your version?
Yeah, it's like Occam's razor. There's Hanlon's razor, which is never attribute to evil that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. So there are these ideas that are helping you to cut through all the bullshit, basically. So my permaculture razor is, whenever you're looking at like a problem in the world, whether it's a conspiracy, the Queen's a lizard, they're spraying stuff in the skies, or there's a cabal, the Illuminati, whatever it is, just understand it enough to be like, okay, so that's the theory. Okay, great. So what would I do if one, none, or all of this were true? And every time I've asked myself that question on every conspiracy I've ever come across, the answer is always homesteading.
Wow.
It always comes back to basically take personal responsibility for myself and my family, become a producer, create something of value, and have fun.
Yeah. And that's because you've seen it work. You have practice.
I've seen it work. And then the other side of that, I have like a second razor, which is if you had a crystal ball and you could look into the future with absolute certainty and know that nothing you did was going to make a damn difference. We were going to get hit by an asteroid, or just the lizard people are going to win no matter what, or whatever it is. And there's nothing you could have done that would have made a difference. What would you do then? Same thing I've been doing right now.
Wow.
Just partnering with natural ecosystems, regenerating the ecosystem that I'm a part of, on an intimate basis, eating the best food in the world. And we can get into more of like the strategy for how people can do this, but like, my family is incredibly wealthy, but we have no money. Because financial capital is just one of the forms of capital that you can have in your life.
Let's get into that right now, because I do want to eventually get into, and I think I want to focus on this largely, the how to transition from someone who lives like me in a subdivision with an HOA with Mother Earth basically butt naked. Into homestead, because my wife and I legitimately want to do that. We talk about it all the time. It's just like how do we approach doing that? How do we find other families maybe if we want to do it together? And I'm sure we'll talk about all that, but let's talk about that first.
Okay, so there's a framework called the 8 Forms of Capital. It was created by two permaculture guys in the space, Ethan Rowland and Gregory Landau. And I think there's lots of different versions like this, but I particularly like this one. It's very comprehensive. And so basically, if you ask someone what is capital, or what are the resources that you have, most people think of money and things. So that's financial capital and material capital. But you also have social capital. You have experiential capital. So these are the skills that you have. You have intellectual capital, which is like the IP, like the book I wrote, or the podcast that you've created, or the brand that you've created. That's intellectual property. You also have things like spiritual capital, which is, you might say it depending on what your worldview is. If you're, a religious person, or for me, like my spiritual capital is just like the power of nature. There's how no matter how many times it's been knocked out and basically taken to zero, it just comes back. It's like, I don't need to know anything else other than the fact that life wants to live. That's a huge resource for me. Then there's living capital. So this is like your personal, health, but also the ecosystem, the soil, the water cycle, the biodiversity in your area. And then finally, you have cultural capital, which is, this is the only form of capital that, every other form of capital is held by individuals. Cultural capital is when individuals get together and they start to exchange, patterns start to emerge, and that's what culture is. And so when you look at and you do an inventory of all those 8 forms of capital in your life, and literally like the debits and the credits, just like you would on your bank balance, like how much, social capital do I have versus how much do I owe? And you start to realize 2 things, like, holy crap, I am incredibly wealthy, but how much your bank balance is, I've got the best friends in the world, I've got really great health, or whatever it is. But also you start to realize how little things and money are to your well-being.
Yeah.
And so, when homesteading is really perfect for this, because it allows you to essentially create a business that you can have tax write-offs. So, basically that solves the financial problem. So now the government isn't stealing 20 to 50% of everything that you produce every year, because you could just invest it back into the farm, which is really what the money and things are supposed to do, is to help you have better relationships, more free time, better health. So there's just homesteading solves all these problems.
Yeah. That totally makes sense. I mean, even if I like take an inventory of my life, and as you were saying all that, it's like invoking just gratitude in me. I'm like, damn, I actually like am really wealthy if I consider all those other things other than just strictly finances.
When you think like every person who's if you've been with someone on their deathbed and you ask them like, what would you change? No one's ever says, I wish I had more stuff and I wish I had more money in my bank. They wished that they had more experiences, that they'd spent more time with their family, that they'd, invented more things that would help the people that they love in their life after they're gone. It's all the other 6 forms of capital that are really important for people. The money and the things are a means to the ends of the other resources.
Totally.
And so when you start to have some of these paradigm shifts, and like, I know, like, I would love to get into the how to homestead, but the most important thing is the why. Why are you doing this? It's because it solves every problem in the world and helps us to literally build the parallel system that we're all talking about. Because there's a quote from the founder of permaculture, Bill Mollison, that changed my life. And he said, like, the biggest change that we need to make is to go from consumption to production. And the reason is that every revolution, or all revolutionaries, are utterly dependent on the systems they're trying to overthrow. And they print more words and bullets than they do food and shelter. And so, like, when we can't bite the hand that feeds us. So this homesteading and what everything that we're trying to do in our company is helping people to not fight the system, to walk away, to get out of this toxic relationship that we're in with the government, and literally start to build their own lives, one homestead at a time, and then get more people in the area. We're not going to argue with people. We're going to inspire, and we're not going to build fences. We're going to build bigger tables and just bring more people in. And yes, we're going to need, heavy industry and all these other specialized trades to, live in the world that we live in. Like farming, not everyone should be a farmer.
That's what I was going to ask. Like,
everyone should be a gardener, but not everyone should be a farmer.
Okay. That's fair. So like enough to provide at least, I don't want to put a percentage, but maybe half of your family's food.
Yeah. I mean, whatever makes sense for your, like, what I always tell people is figure out whatever skills you have right now, your experiential capital in the current, call it fiat world, find ways that they can be leveraged in the world that we want to create. And if you don't have any, like say you're a bureaucrat with just zero transferable skills, that sucks. You're gonna need 5 to 10 years to totally reskill. But almost everybody else, even if you are just like an Excel spreadsheet person at work, those are really useful skills that are going to be needed in the world that we're trying to build. So, you don't have to produce 50% or whatever, but just partner with nature, grow a garden, enough for one salad a year. That'd be my minimum. It's like you should be able to have
We've checked that box, so we're good.
Yeah, one meal a year where you can sit down and be like, everything that we're eating today, we grew ourselves. And like that is, and when I look at my, social capital and spiritual capital, those are the most powerful memories I have as a child. And we still do. It's our favorite thing as our family, is when we sit down and
you can say
everything from the butter to the, some of the spices. It's like this entire meal. It's like a 4-course meal was produced by us.
You have such an uncharacteristic, and I say uncharacteristic relative to us in the 21st century, relationship with food, in that I take you, and correct me if I'm wrong here, to be like inherently grateful for food itself, because you know what it takes for that to be sitting on your plate.
And that's another reason is that you will have so much respect. A lot of the clients that we work with, if they haven't, tried to do some of these things, the analogy I give is, if you were to watch all the seasons of Grey's Anatomy and then think you could do open heart surgery. It's like a lot of people watch all the YouTube videos and they've watched Joel Salatin and all these big names, and they think they can go into and do it. It's hard. This is an art, and it's not to say that everyone can't do it, but it takes 5 years to have an overnight success, as they say. And so you're going to need to learn these skills and make mistakes. I think it is as complex, if not more so, than being a doctor.
Would you advise? Okay, so I'll preface this by saying, like I said, we have a fourth of an acre for our house, so we're in a subdivision that has like a little bit bigger plots, and like, would you advise someone before they take the leap to like purchasing 20 acres to learn how to cultivate what they're on first?
Absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely. So
thank you. I'm going to make sure my wife watches this episode now.
The smaller the smaller the scale of land you have, the more productive it will be per unit area, because you can put more thought. There's a beautiful saying, I think it was Wendell Berry, he said, the most important fertilizer is a farmer's footprints. And so when you can observe and interact with your ecosystem on a more intimate basis, it will be far more productive than if you had 10 acres or 20 acres. And there's so much. So like a quarter acre is 10,000 square feet. That's a lot. Like 100 to 200 square feet is enough like garden space per person to provide all the veg if it's gardened properly. And then you start looking at, fruit trees. Like you guys could easily produce all your fruit and veg if it was well designed out, and it'd be beautiful and functional. And I would also say it will take less time than it takes you to mow your lawn currently. It will take less. It'll be less costly than the maintenance on your lawn, and you'll be more physically fit, because in order to do all the things, necessary to grow a garden, like it really works every part of your body.
Do you garden barefoot?
Yeah, as much as I can.
Okay, I was going to guess. Of course you do.
Yeah.
That's what I try to do too, but I'm not in my garden enough. But what you just said, I cannot wait to share this episode with my wife, because she's like, we need to get on 20 acres now. I'm like, yeah, we'll get to that, but I want to learn how to cultivate what we have now before we immediately jump to that. Because if we're already feeling overwhelmed with this right now, then
totally,
this is not going to solve it.
And like you could have chickens. I don't know what the
I don't give a shit about the HOA that much.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. But like you could easily have, a dozen chickens in a great little chicken tractor that would move through your food forest and capture all your rainwater. And like, there's a lot you can do. And all those skills are transferable to whatever size land that you have. So like in permaculture, there's this concept called zones of use, which is essentially the things that you need more, or the things that need you more, you put them closest to you. So like your kitchen garden, your herbs, any things that you're doing, multiple times a day, those are like right next. They're within 20 to 50 feet of your house.
Okay.
And then you're into zone 2, which is things that you're doing, maybe once a week. And then zone 3 is like once a month. Zone 4 is like once a year. And then
is it like concentric rings?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It can be shaped based on geography.
Okay, that makes sense.
But it's basically the things that you need more, that need you more, you put closest to you, so they're easier to manage.
Is there some like non-physical reasons behind that too? Like the things that you need more often are closer to your biofield possibly, and maybe
I'm sure there's I'm sure there's all kinds of benefits. I mean, the mathematical reasoning for it is that the area of a circle is exponential to its diameter or radius. And so for every step you take away from your house, you have an exponential amount of things to manage and to observe. So you want to keep the things that are really finicky. And so most people have their garden way too far away. Your garden should be as close to your house as your fridge. Because for the summer months, it is your fridge. And most people get that wrong. And this is where like the design aspect comes in, is the reason why homesteading and gardening and farming has been so much work, and why everyone left the agriculture to go for the easier life in the cities, because they were designed terribly. That's why I'm the youngest, or the only kid that stayed on the farm. Is like, it sucked. It was basically drudgery all day, every day. But now with these systems, they can be beautiful, they're efficient, and incredibly enjoyable.
Okay, so you talked about, or you agreed with me rather, that it's better to learn how to cultivate the land that you're on. But let's say that you've already mastered that. So now this becomes the practical, like the how to shift into a full homesteading lifestyle on land, away from everybody else. And so many of us have that like idea just entrenched in our head, especially with the way of the world. I think everyone's sort of picking up the same thing that you're pulling out of the ether. Like, this is the way to no longer be dependent on any of those systems
Yeah.
to start forming our own system separate of that one. I think that's the Buckminster Fuller quote,
Yeah.
make the old one obsolete,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it's, again, not by fighting, it's by just making it obsolete by cultivating new ones, right? And so how do we go about doing that? Because, I mean, I've even looked at that quite a bit on how do you go about knowing which land is best to purchase? Is that really that big of a concern? Just talk to me about all the things that go into developing a homestead.
Yeah. So there's one of the frameworks that I use in the book. I call it the order of operations. Other people call it the scale of permanence. There's different iterations, but it's essentially there are factors to do with land that can be arranged hierarchically. And just like in a math or algebra problem, when you're trying to solve it, there's a specific order you have to solve the problem in. If you get it wrong, you get the wrong answer. And so that order is geography, climate, water, access, structures, fencing, flora or plants, fauna or animals, business, technology, and soils.
So that order.
That order.
Okay.
And the hierarchy is they go from hard to change or very influential or they take a long time to change to easy or quick or less influential at the bottom. So this is not in an order of importance. Soils are it's not that they're not important. It's that they're incredibly easy to change when you get everything else right.
That makes sense. Because if you're choosing land, what was the first one?
Geography.
Geography. Yeah, like, I mean, you can create like a microclimate, but that takes like that one guy who oversaw the regeneration of the Lewis Plateau in China. That took like 15 to 20 years.
John DeLue.
John DeLue.
Yeah.
So
another analogy is like clouds move, mountains don't.
Right. Right. I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
And so when you're looking at that, you think, okay, so what are all the factors, the subcategories of geography? Well, it's, elevation, it's the, underlying, the demography, the community that's around you. And I would say most people, it's more important to buy the right community or in the right area than it is to buy the right piece of land. Because, one of the reasons why our farm is so developed is that we have roots in our community. We have a family base that we're able to leverage. So we don't all have
a lot of like-minded people in your area too.
People, so that we don't have to own the same $100,000 tractor that only gets used for a fraction of the time. We can leverage that, and
you share it amongst.
Absolutely,
wow,
yeah. And so, like there's a bunch of aspects with geography. Then there's climate, obviously, and then we get into like the more. So climate is basically, weather patterns, basic stuff like that. If you know I have to grow bananas, great. That cuts out most of the world, and you got to live basically within a zone 7 or 8 or higher. So even coming back even further than that, I would say figure out what your non-negotiables are. What are the things that you're not going to move on? We have to be within 100 kilometers from X, or I have to have bananas, or whatever it is. Because the more non-negotiables you have, the tighter, the less options you're going to have to sift through. Then from there, go through the 8 forms of capital. When I'm looking for a property, I'm looking for really good water in multiple forms. So good wells, springs, creeks, lakes, ponds that are already there, or drainages, that water that flows through them. You want to have really good access to your property, so that either existing roads or future potential roads, and also roads in and out from your property. So it's not just the stuff that's on your land, it's also that stuff that's outside of your borders. Structures, I would rather buy bare land and do it right than to buy land that has lots of infrastructure that's in the wrong place. Most people build roads and buildings in valleys, so they're always dealing with drainage issues. So like my ideal situation is someone's in the city, they've got a good job, they're practicing on their small, backyard, getting skilled up, then they buy raw land somewhere, and as they make money at whatever their fiat job is, they've got a farming business that they're investing all their surplus money into that homestead or farm. And you basically build a homestead over 5 years with money that the government would have otherwise stolen from you. And after 5 years, when your core infrastructure is done, you sell your doghouse in the city and for $1 million, and you put the last bit of capital in, because it'll all be capital gains exempt in most places. If it's your primary residence, you dump that last piece into your property and you're done. And
That's smart.
You've taken 4 or 5 years to slowly build a homestead with tax money. And there's different strategies to do that. With that, and maybe we'll touch on the whole contract law and stuff later. It's like, you don't have to get into any of the weeds of, cohesion law and all these other things. It's just like, understand their rules and find the simplest loophole and use that.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that deals with kind of water access, structures, fencing. Again, most, like a bare property with no fencing, most fences are built poorly in the wrong place. And then the other one is trees.
Mm-hmm.
Like having trees, no matter how rich you are, you can't buy a 100-year-old oak tree.
Mm-hmm.
There's no amount of money in the world that will get that to move it from somewhere else to your property. So it's way easier to go into a solid forest, carve out, the half acre where your house and your main infrastructure is going to go, and leave the rest of the forest, and you're done in a year, rather than having to plant all those trees and wait 100 years before you've got shade, shelter, firewood, all those things. And what's funny is those properties are typically cheaper, or at least no more money than the property that has the fancy house and the brand new fences and all these other things that are poor quality, built inefficiently, are in the wrong place. So I tend to push people towards buy raw land
that has trees.
That has trees,
yeah,
and is raw in terms of, it doesn't have structures or fencing or access on it.
Okay, so on the tree topic, I've heard some. I don't even remember where I heard it from. I think it was when my wife and I were exploring the possibility of getting on land a while back, or maybe it was when we were like temporarily living with my mom and she had a bunch of trees. I don't remember, but someone had mentioned to us that you don't want land with lots of native trees that are like big on it. You want much more clear, treeless land for growing food. I just want to hear your take on that.
Yeah. So I mean, like, yeah, if you want to grow corn, then yeah, you want barrel land.
I don't want to grow a bunch of corn
with no trees. But if you want to have, shelter from winds and, shade and, really healthy soils and better pastures, then the more trees, the better. And my rationale is, like, you can cut a tree down in a couple hours, even if it's a massive tree, but it'll take you, 100 years to grow that tree. And so I would way rather buy, tree land and carve out what I don't want, and prepare that soil. And yeah, it is work to go in and dig the roots up for where you're going to want your gardens, but it's like an excavator going in and like that a few times, gone. Now you've got a great garden.
Versus 100 years.
Yeah, 100 years of
trees. That makes sense.
And then even like that tree land will be less valuable than cleared land, because we have this crazy, a lot of everyone else in our culture has the same idea, which is trees are bad. You want this open pasture, no matter what you're doing. You want to just have open land, and not the case at all.
That's helpful to hear, because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who have this idea that like a homestead is just a bunch of open acreage.
No, like if you have 50% tree coverage, that'd be ideal. Like, you don't want a jungle, because there's no matter what you're doing, you're going to have to clear some of those out. The ideal is about 50% shade for, say, pastures, and even around like gardens and stuff. Like, I like having trees around my garden, because, when you get into, crazy temperatures where you're in the hundreds, plants can't photosynthesize properly, especially annuals, when they're that hot. So like, dappled sunlight is a huge resource. And again, you can't get that for a couple decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. And if you're looking to, because the first things you mentioned are geography and climate. So if you're looking to optimize for diversity rather than specificity, like, bananas, like you mentioned, I want a diverse array of fruits and vegetables, a decent growing season, maybe the ability to have ruminants and things like this. Yeah. What locations in North America are you typically going to want to look?
I mean, in like on the like mainland, North America, there's pretty much anywhere is good.
Really?
Like there are breeds of cattle that have been bred to live in the swamps of Louisiana. Like, they're literally like swimming through water most of their life. So it really is entirely up to your preference. And there are incredible plant and fruit species everywhere in the world. And that was probably one of the most challenging things, or the biggest paradigm shift that I've had in permaculture. When I got into it, a lot of the training is around like the subtropics, and it's these crazy, bananas and jackfruits and coconuts and jaboticabas and these things I've never heard of. It's like, I can't grow any of that. But then when I really turned, my sights, okay, but what does grow here well, and stop trying to push the limits on, am I going to find a cold hardy pawpaw or banana that's going to make it? It's like, no, just focus on the 2 dozen, berries that are incredibly, nutrient dense, and they're basically like sour Skittles. Like, they're just the craziest flavors you've ever had. And when I shifted from trying to grow things that were outside of my zone to just figuring out what could grow there, it's anywhere. You can get a diversity of flora and fauna anywhere in North America. But what you don't want to do is try to force function an ecosystem where you're buying zone 4 and you're trying to grow bananas, because then you got to build a $500,000 greenhouse.
Right.
It's like, figure out what's going to grow well in a zone 4, or move. So my saying is, change your goals to match your geography, or change your geography to match your goals, because otherwise you're going to be fighting nature.
That makes sense. Yeah. And that makes sense on why the first thing in that succession of what is most important to consider has geography and then climate, because you're fighting an uphill battle at that point if you pick the wrong place based on your needs.
Yeah.
With that being said, I don't remember the exact statistic on this, but it's something like, typically in grocery stores in North America, we have a spectrum of 300 different fruits and vegetables that are available. But in reality, there's like upwards of 10,000. I don't know if that's the correct number. Upwards of 10,000 fruits and vegetables. Let's say that's
I
true.
believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. What are you growing on your farm that you don't find in grocery stores in Canada?
Pretty much everything.
Really?
So like just the berries, for example, we've got things called like sea buckthorn, which is like
never even heard of
it's
that.
almost like if you were to cross a pineapple with a like a pineapple with a raspberry with it's the craziest thing ever. And it's one of the only berries in the world, I believe, or only fruits in the world that actually has B12 in it.
Wow.
It has like,
shout out to the vegans.
Yeah,
so the
no
vegans
kidding. Yeah.
There you go. There's your fruit.
So there's sea buckthorn. Buffalo berry is another one. Silver buffalo berry, Shabridia argentea. That one is like our native version of the sea buckthorn, which comes from Europe. And so the Latin name for sea buckthorn means shiny horse. So the Romans used to feed it to their horses because it's so high in omega fatty acids that it gave their horses beautiful shiny coats. There's things like tayberries and haskaps or honeyberries, or the currants are fairly popular, but like the varieties of currants that you get, or any of the fruit, it's optimized for flavor and nutrient density, not shelf life.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that you buy in the grocery store in the fruits and vegetable aisle, all those varieties, like the Cavendish banana, like there are thousands of varieties of banana. There's like 2 that you can buy in a grocery store, because those are the only ones that don't go bad when they're getting shipped from the orchard to the supermarket. Versus a lot of the stuff that I grow, it's like if you don't eat it that day, it's bad.
Wow.
But that's why having your food forest or your garden literally right outside your door. So as opposed to going to the fridge to get some shitty strawberries, you're going to your 10 steps the other way and you're picking them fresh, and it's the best fruit you've ever eaten.
Have you thought about how, like, the possibility of our terrain, I'm talking about our bodies here, adapting to the environment that we're in?
Absolutely.
And that would mean it's better for us to eat fruits and vegetables, and even if we're consuming flesh, the flesh that is also adapted to that terrain that we're living in.
Absolutely. So, and I'll give you a tangible example of that. If you were to do a soil sample of anywhere in the world and analyze it for macronutrients, and then you were to do what's called a plant tissue sample of the weeds that are growing in that same area, whatever the soil is low in, your weeds will be high in.
That's incredible.
And so plants literally are the alchemists of the ecosystem that are trying to balance everything. They're the pioneer ecosystem that's enabling all the other higher life forms to come. And higher, I don't mean by like better, just more complex or animals to come in so that they can survive and thrive.
Okay, so then if we're taking that to and applying it to our bodies, it would mean the same thing.
Yeah, whatever your soils are low in, or the plants are going to be helping to balance that out.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. Like I'll give you another example. So isn't it interesting that all desert ecosystems, the cultures that have grew up in desert ecosystems, they're all polygamous.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have these harems and like the reason is that in desert environments, I believe they're incredibly, I think they're alkaline. All the fruits and vegetables are then acidic, which acidity in the body actually changes the amount of female and male sperm that there are. And so you have a disproportionate amount of women born in desert, in dry climates than you do in temperate climates. Absolutely.
Wow.
And so like there are farmers that do this where they'll put apple cider vinegar in their livestock waters so they get more females born.
That is so crazy. Wow, that's blowing my mind.
Like, yeah, the intelligence behind ecosystems, you don't have to understand it. It's interesting to figure it out, but like there is an intelligence, whether it's coming from God or natural selection, whatever it is, but everything exists for a reason.
Yeah.
And just when you have like a trust, it's not even faith, like it's just a knowing that that's the way that it has to be, otherwise it wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
A lot of these problems just fade away, and that's what I found really inspiring as I've gotten more into this regenerative agriculture movement, is like all the agricultural books and all these, just throw them out. You don't need to know about the 100 diseases that chickens can get. You just need to understand that whatever disease it has, it's not trying to kill it. It's either helping it to adapt or it's helping it to heal. So figure out where it came from. And it's this literally, I could go for hours on the stories of plants or animals getting sick. And like, there's a German medicine reason for why they got sick. And when you solve the root cause, the disease goes away.
I'm glad we're circling back around to this, because you brought up earlier how many organic practices are simply no longer treating with like synthetic herbicides and pesticides. They're treating with, quote, organic ones. It reminds me of like the functional medicine space. And I'm not meaning to shit on functional medicine.
They're like the naturopathic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Instead, still not treating the root cause, just now doing it with supplements and herbs instead. Exactly. I'm not going to say that there isn't a place for those sometimes.
Absolutely. And they do help. Like I've gone to naturopathic doctors before and you see improvements, but when you do find the root cause, and if you are lacking in some kind of mineral, getting it from your food is far better than getting it in a supplement.
But it's so interesting that it's like the micro and the macro, right? Like we're literally like fractals. The same principles that can be applied to our bodies on the micro and health also apply to our environment. And you've witnessed that yourself. I remember listening to an episode that you were on someone's podcast where you started talking about your cows and when they were in certain you share you go ahead.
So I figured out kind of the German medicine principles before I'd heard about German medicine, and it was from the experience of mastitis. So mastitis is a very common, quote, disease or illness in dairy animals. And we've had milk cows pretty much my whole life on the farm. And when I was in my teens, my parents got rid of them. And then in kind of 2012, I bought some again, and they were like mine. And so I spent a lot of time with them, just watching them. And anyways, we had mastitis issues right away. But it was, and I at that time I was I was somewhere in between, like there must be some imbalance, but I couldn't figure it out. I knew that it wasn't an antibiotic problem. Like it wasn't because they didn't have.
It wasn't a bacterial problem causing the mastitis.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't have any reason behind it, but I was just like, that's not how nature works. It can't be that they're not getting enough Tylenol or whatever it is, right? And so after like 5 or 6 years of experimenting and changing is it dirty bedding? Is it that I'm not using the teat dips that they use? Is it that I'm That the calf's nursing right after I milk, is that a problem? And I just eliminated all these variables until one day it just like hit me. It's like, holy crap. Every time I move the dairy cows to this particular pasture, they're getting mastitis. And as soon as I move them out of that pasture and they're somewhere else, they don't get it anymore. And then I realized, oh yeah, that's because on that pasture, I have to separate their calves from them at night, just because the way the fencing worked out. And so they weren't able to physically touch noses with their babies overnight, just a 12-hour period. They could physically see them, but they were 60 feet apart, but they couldn't physically touch. And that was causing a separation conflict from them when they were on that pasture. Wow. And I would do all these natural treatments and garlic and molasses and apple cider vinegar. And then the mastitis would go away. And I'd think, yeah, I did it with, and then it was like, oh no, I just moved them out of that pasture. They got to touch noses again. The mastitis went away.
No.
And so I changed my fencing, and I literally haven't had mastitis since, unless there's been like a calf dies or there's some other separation. Like every single time, if a cow has mastitis, it's not because the bacteria and the fungi are trying to get it. It's because it's
an adaptation.
It's an adaptation. She's lost her calf. And when she is reunited with it, she wants to be able to produce a lot of milk to help soothe the calf who's, really upset that he can't touch noses with his mother.
So you realized this before you got into German
before I got into
medicine.
German medicine. Yeah.
Whoa.
I was like, that story's in the book, and that was written in, I think 2019. And I didn't hear about German medicine until, around the first time that we chatted on my podcast. So it's like a year ago.
That's incredible.
But that same story is like, I'll give you another example. A lot of beef producers vaccinate for, scours or all different kinds of diseases, blackleg, whatever it is. And you look at what are the symptoms of, say, scours? And it's like they're shitting their guts out, basically. Okay, so when do they typically get that? Well, it's after branding season. Well, how undigestible of a morsel would it be to be tied down and tortured and burned with a hot rod and be separated from your mother for maybe 5 or 6 hours, and then you're released, and then afterwards you get scours. And so, our reductionistic paradigm is, well, there must be a thing that's causing that. Let's give them a jab, torture them more, which they still get scours, but it would have been way worse if we didn't give them the vaccine. Right. Or you look at blackleg, which is basically like the animal literally is like starting to decompose from the inside. And they say that it's a virus from the soil. And it's like, no, okay, what are the origins of that? It's a self-devaluation conflict. And when does it typically come up? When they move the cows onto fresh pasture. So they've been this shitty, terrible, muddy, pen all winter long. And they've probably been bullied by the other cows that are around them that are taking all the best feed. And it's just a terrible thing. And they get out into pasture and they've got their own free scenario. And there's a healing crisis where they're literally start to go, rotten on the inside if it's a bad enough conflict. And farmers will say, well, that's a blackleg. And if you don't vaccinate within, 12 hours, they're all going to die. Or did the vaccine help? Or did they just resolve that conflict and they healed themselves? And so you can go through every...
And you've witnessed all this.
I've witnessed all of it. You can just see it.
That's incredible, man. Oh
so we haven't used any vaccines on our animals or chemicals of any kind for 30 years.
Incredible. And at this point, after you've sort of taken over your family's farm and started implementing.
Well, my parents are still there. Like they're still full-time managing.
Got it. But you're kind of like providing a little bit of oversight, I'd imagine, and direction.
Yeah.
Moving away from organic and more towards regenerative and permaculture. Describe to me like the state of your farm
in terms of like now versus then, or
now versus then.
I mean, like it is like orders of magnitude more profitable. Like my whole life, my parents worked off farm to support the farm, and now like my parents, myself, and I have a full-time farm hand. I basically take one person on for a year and they manage the farm for me and I kind of coach them through it. So it's providing the full living for 4 people. And yes, I do off-farm consulting, but I don't need to. That's a personal choice. So yeah, we're far more profitable. Every year I see new species of plants and animals that I've never seen before. One of my favorite things is seeing a bird fly through. It's like, I've never seen that bird in my life, and having to run to what is that and where does it come from and what's changed in the ecosystem that has allowed it to come back. Or like my dad, he was born and raised in that area. Like I'm 5th generation in that kind of area. My
So
ancestors
cool.
moved to that area in the early 1900s, and so it's crazy. It's like we've seen the. I have a picture of my great great grandparents in 1914, and they're literally living in like a hole that they dug into the side of a hill that they like ramshackled some tree branches to form like a house. Has all their possessions out in front of it. That's like 2 miles away from where I live now.
No
And
way.
in the corner of that photo, there's a hand dug well. So that they were able to literally with a shovel dig down and get fresh drinking water. Now our wells are like hundreds of feet deep. All of our lakes are dropping. There's no springs anymore. Everything's like our water cycle is just being destroyed. In the 10 years since we've implemented, the water harvesting systems on our farm, putting wetlands back, which were all drained in the 70s, we've seen springs return to the farm. There's been 1 year where a creek that never existed before flowed for about half the summer, which is like when I was a kid, there was never standing water on our farm.
That's insane.
And now we had like a creek for 6 months. So my goal, like before I die, is that creek is going to flow year round, 365 days of the year. And I have no doubt that I'm going to hit that. And it wasn't even there 150 years ago when my ancestors got here. My dad used to hunt beavers and muskrats on our land. Now, when he was a kid, he would come over and hunt on the neighbor's land. There hasn't been a beaver or muskrat since my dad was like 20. And when we started to put these wetlands back, literally like the next day after they filled, there was a muskrat in there.
That's amazing.
So it's like just seeing the bounce back. Our animals are healthier. We are grass finishing animals in 17 months and getting better weights than commercial producers are getting in 24 months.
Wow.
With like basically zero inputs other than mineral and water. So it's like I could just go on and on and on. There's nothing, and we are still at like the ground. We haven't even got into like the exponential phase of like improvement. We're still starting to take off and seeing improvements. We're going to see a further probably 10x yield increase in our pastures across our whole farm in my lifetime if we keep on the trajectory that we're going. It's super inspiring. And on
so
our
cool.
on our 250 acres, we provide basically enough food for probably say 50 to 60 people, like full-grown adults, to have a pound of meat, a couple eggs, a glass of milk, some berries, and we don't sell vegetables, but we easily could every day of every year.
Incredible.
And there's been years where the only inputs we've had have been 500 gallons of diesel and some baler twine and equipment parts.
That's incredible.
We've literally produced all our straw, all our
so it really
hay.
almost is like
It's
a closed
loop
system.
And I've scaled, because everyone asks, yeah, that's a great idea, but can it scale? Can it feed the world? Absolutely. If you were to take our 250 acre farm and scale that up and extrapolate that to all the farmland, arable farmland in North America, yeah, it's easily.
Have you done the calculations on the alleged population of the world and like the alleged amount of land that they're like that?
Yeah.
Assuming that what the figures are is correct, have you done the calculations on like, could adopting your way of living be enough to still set aside plenty of land for like ecological purposes, if you will, or for nature itself to do its thing outside of any of our inputs or needs, and still have enough available for humanity to thrive?
100%. I mean, so I don't believe in the population, time bomb, or whatever that Paul wrote his book on. I think the most, so human beings are a keystone species on this planet. Everyone's probably seen, the documentaries of the wolves of Yellowstone, where the beavers come back and they dam up the rivers, the wolves came back, chased the herbivores up into the hills so the beavers could have enough material to start building dams, and that rebuilt the whole ecosystem. Human beings are the same thing. We are one of the most complex and amazing organisms on this planet, but we have focused all of our energy for the last, I don't know how many thousands of years, into fighting nature and having this command and control paradigm. And if we stop that and move to how do we partner with this, like we could probably sustain 10 times the number of humans on this planet. Because if every human being was allowed to fulfill their potential of creativity and production, and not be hampered down by all these bureaucrats and just bullshit, there's no telling what improvements could be made. And you've talked about Victor Schauberger and all these other guys. Like we haven't even tapped the surface of what's possible on this planet in terms of productivity, and all of that can be done without, like, the fact that we have the concept of farmland, and I can't remember what the term you used, it was like conservation or reserves. It's like that's part of the paradigm. It's like they're the same thing,
right?
Beavers don't have like their lodge and then the areas that they don't cut. Totally. They're part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a really good point. How do you? So this is a question that I'm going to try to frame as best I can, related to, like working with God, working with that life force that permeates everything.
Uh-huh.
So as you're going through the steps, and let's put yourself in the shoes of someone who's just purchased 10 acres. There's some trees on it, but it was previously a small family farm that did like traditional industrial agriculture on it. So when you're working with nature or God to regenerate this land, how do you know that you're in line with it versus like trying to dictate what you think it should be?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. So I believe that every organism on this planet has a sense of that.
Yeah.
Am I working with nature or God or against it? And that sense is drudgery. The feeling of this sucks. Why am I doing this? Like just or you might call it procrastination or whatever it is, but there is a sense, and everyone knows it, of like, just, I don't want to do that, and they have to force themselves to do it. There's a sense.
So the drudgery is a good thing, you're saying?
No, it's
the bad thing. Okay, that makes sense.
That's the sense that you are going against nature.
Got it. Okay.
So in my book, I talk about there's basically two kind of like rumble strips on the highway of where we're trying to go, and one is like suffering and well-being. And so you want to stay in the, like, if things feel like drudgery, like, don't do that, whatever that is. My motto is drudgery is punishment for stupidity. If you're doing something and it sucks, it's because you're stupid. Stop doing that thing, and your life will get better. And the well-being is just constantly increasing. And so let me give you a tangible example of that. Is if you design a chicken coop, so that when it's time to clean the chicken coop, you don't want to do it because you know how much it's going to suck and it's going to stink and it's going to be all these things. So what do? You delay that. You push it off as long as you can, and then your chickens start to get sick because there's ammonia that's building up in the chicken coop, and now you have to do all these other things, and it's this spiral effect. And now there's side effects of the drug that you gave them or whatever it is. Versus if you design your chicken coop or anything else in your property so that you love doing it, because you know that when you go to clean that chicken coop, that's fertility for your food forest. That's going to get you more apples. It's not drudgery. It's vocation. It's productive work. And so that's the piece that I get people to. The fifth step in my 5-step process is monitor. Mm-hmm. And so you monitor your ecosystem for suffering and well-being in yourself and other organisms.
Got it.
So if your chickens are suffering, or if your milk cow has mastitis, that is the most important thing on your farm. Why is that cow suffering? There's something that's out of balance in your ecosystem, and that will go to affect you. And if you go reach for the antibiotics or the oxytocin or whatever it is to help her let down or do whatever, there will be down chain effects of that will cause further suffering, which will cause further suffering, and I call it the downward spiral.
Literally the same thing that happens with our bodies. It's so crazy.
It's the same thing. Versus if you listen to your body and you listen to the organisms around you, and you just use like basic common sense, you can figure this stuff out. And it's really simple. And just like the German New Medicine, they're biological, they're meaningful. And there's laws to them. There's patterns that are as predictable as the rising and setting of the sun. So that would be my biggest the indicator of whether or not you're working with or against this whatever force it is in the universe is drudgery and well-being.
Got it. Wow.
And I'll a further note to that is, why is it that human beings love like diverse, like naturally? Why do we go to walk through parks? Why do we want to watch birds? And why do we get excited when we see a new? Is because vicarious well-being. We realize there's a beautiful author. He's an indigenous author. His name is Richard Wagamese. And it's a saying that we live because everything else does. And I think every human being and every organism understands that. And so when we see that diversity, we get like this charge out of it because we know that there's security in that the well-being of other organisms, not beyond human beings, is integral to the well-being of ourselves.
I love that quote. My goodness. That is so beautiful. That's so deep. Okay, I want to get back to now the what did you call it again? What do you call it in your book? Like the 11
the order of operations.
The order of operations.
Yeah.
Okay, so we went off on several huge tangents that were very meaningful, very important. I'm glad we did. That's how I typically do this show. But we talked about went in depth on like geology and climate. So what would be the third one now?
Water.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on primary water?
So yeah, 100%. I think it's a real thing. And I actually have had clients who I think have a primary water springs on their property. I don't know how you test them. I've never looked into that, but yeah, I mean, it makes absolute sense. And
but I've heard some people say that you can, as long as you have something that can drill down far enough, you will eventually hit water.
You can tap into it. Okay. Yeah. See, I haven't gone into that. I know that there are, like, say, water witchers or whatever that will go out and find these springs, or that they can use topographical maps to find where the seams are that are more likely to hit them.
Or even like dowsing rods. Sometimes people use.
Yeah, we call them witching rods.
That's what you just call. Okay, that's what I thought you meant.
Water witchers.
Water witching. I like that better. Witching rods. That's cool.
Yeah.
So when you're helping a client find a property, are you pretty big on there already being very clear signs of an abundance of water?
Absolutely. Yeah.
There. Okay.
Yeah. If there isn't, I honestly.
So like New Mexico and Arizona, probably not going to help have people.
So it depends. Because if in those areas they can have large seasonal flows of water through their properties, and if you aren't there on the one day that there's a flash flood, you'd be like, oh, there's no water here. Versus like, Chris and I were walking around in one of the parks here, and like it was like a light drizzle of rain. And there was, like 1 million gallons an hour flowing through this culvert. That's enough water for like hundreds of people in the time that it's flowing. So yeah, it's not necessarily, but that's where we're looking at topographical maps and seeing, okay, what's the catchment like? What's the weather patterns? Are there signs of erosion that let me know that there has been reliable, water flows through this area? Can we build dams? All those things. Ideally, there would already be existing stuff there, or neighbors in the area have wells so okay, you can drill down economically enough to tap into that. But there's also downsides of drilling water wells in certain areas where there's there's fracking and things like that, because the groundwater. Or
even I would imagine like putting water, like artificial lakes and things like this, have negative effects as well, right?
If they're large enough, for sure. But like on a small scale, like think of, again, beavers.
Yeah.
Like the scale of dam, like the largest beaver dam in the world is like 1 kilometer long. Right. So it's like, as long as you're staying kind of within that fractal, I think you're very safe.
So as long as you're mimicking literal nature, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, these mega dams are so in British Columbia, in Canada, they're actually taking out a lot of these old hydroelectric dams, because what they found is that the economic value that the dams are producing in terms of electricity is far less than the loss of growth in the forest, because the dams, when they installed them, they broke the spawning cycle of the salmon, and the amount of fertility of the fish swimming back upstream and fertilizing the forest, drastically reduced the growth rate of these trees. So they're literally tearing these dams out because they weren't, they were causing harm and reducing the economy.
God.
So like, again, there's nothing, but beaver dams are built in such a way that salmon can jump over them, and they're actually a benefit to the spawning cycles. And we can do the same thing. We can design even large dams to account for these kind of spawning cycles, and people are starting to do it. Absolutely. But it's a paradigm shift.
You just think of like the second, third, fourth, like downstream effects of even
everything has consequences.
Yeah. It's incredible. Wow.
Yeah. And so that's where like my metric was like suffering and well-being, is that everything that you do, permaculture, to my knowledge, is the only design system that has an ethical framework, which is, earth care, people care, future care. So basically you want to do only things that are good for you and all other organisms, now and into the future. That's the directive.
Kind of like seventh generation.
Yeah, same idea.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so like when you're designing your property, or eventually when we're using this frameworks like this on a watershed scale, that's the way we'll be thinking. It's not how do we stop these invasive species from coming in. It's like, why are the invasive species there? And there's a reason for why they're there. I don't believe in weeds.
They're not invasive. They're bioremediating.
Yeah,
right?
They are the hardworking immigrants that are coming in to do the work that the natives wouldn't do.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I'm just drawing so many parallels in my mind to like how the body works too, and
Totally.
like my understanding of terrain. It's so cool to see it discussed in a farming context. It's really beautiful. Okay, so water is third in the order of operations, and fourth is
access.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So there's like roads, footpaths, farm tracks, any bridges, anything like that they're using to get into or around your property.
Got it.
And so typically you're trying to integrate your access ways into your water harvesting system. So a dam that you're building is also a road that helps you to get across, whatever drainage or creek that you're building. You're trying to design your chore paths so that they're, close, so that if you're going to feed your animals, twice a day, that's going to be a major, traffic area on your farm. What other things can you stack around that, so that just by virtue of going and doing your chores, you're accomplishing something?
Yeah.
So I call it like the grocery store aisle model, where you literally put your primary food production systems along your chore path.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, do you put, if you have a fence there, you put a lot of berries that grow up that fence?
It could be a trellis.
Yeah.
It could be, raised beds you're walking through. It could be a food forest, so that you just, as you're walking by, you're looking, oh, the strawberries are ready. I'm going to pick those later. Oh, the garden needs to be watered because it's a bit dry right now. And these are really common sense things, but most people don't think to put them. What they do is, oh, there's really good soil all the way over there. That's where I'm going to put my garden. Like, no, at my new homestead that I'm building right now, I literally put it where there was a gravel pad before, because that was the best place to put the garden, because it's right outside my front door. I don't think.
How do you reconcile that though? If there is better soil over there, do you then just like do whatever you can to
move it or build soil? Like
bioremediate the soil there.
You can turn pure clay into beautiful topsoil in a couple seasons.
I need help with that because we have a lot of clay.
Again, like the plants are turning concrete into a forest.
Yeah, incredible.
So like, and if that's without any help from a keystone species like us. If we can intervene like the beavers do and do a few things, we can take something that would take a decade or a century and do it in a season.
Wow. Okay. Number 5.
So structures.
Yeah.
So this is like your house, your outbuildings, shops, garages, any of that stuff. You are, as soon as you finish a building, it starts to degrade. And so there are like degenerative and regenerative assets. So the kind of rule with structures is you want to have them be as few as possible and as well built as possible. So they're going to last as long as possible. And then again, position them in the landscape so that they are accomplishing as many functions as you can. So is the roof, can it be positioned in such a way that it's also the mounting system for solar panels, or that the one building is going to provide water for your garden?
Yeah, like rainwater catchment systems.
Really simple stacking functions is another one of the principles in permaculture. And they're also positioned in the landscape where they're not in valleys or areas that are going to paint you into a corner for something else. Which is again why water. When I'm designing a property, you always start with like, where are the roads and water systems going to go? And then your buildings click in after those, and then your fences, and which is the next one, and plants. And
such a flip, because people typically think about like, oh, where am I putting my house first?
No.
Yeah,
it's the opposite. Again, that if you try to do your division before you do your addition and subtraction, you're going to get the wrong answer in math.
That
right?
Makes sense. You're going to have just recurring problems over and over and over again.
Yeah, and if we stop thinking in terms of a lifespan of 25 years like we do for most of our buildings, and we start thinking, some of the oldest houses in the world are over 1,000 years old. They've had literally been inhabited for 1,000 years. When you think that level of 7 generations in the future, it becomes way more than just spin around and point to a spot. That looks like a good spot for a house. No, you're going to spend a lot of time and energy figuring out where that asset might cost $1 million and is going to last for 1,000 years.
Right.
And just by nature of where you put it in the landscape, it accomplishes functions that make your life better.
Are you using atypical building materials for your structure?
I mean, typically you want to be building with whatever it was historically built with, because they kind of figured it out.
That's what I was getting.
So it's
That's
like,
what I was kind of getting
in
at.
certain areas there's adobe, certain areas it's timber. In my area it was sod houses, or straw bale houses. So yeah, try to use natural buildings wherever possible, but it's not to say that you can't use, modern technology or modern building materials. But in general, yes, when I'm advising a client on what kind of house to use, I try to push them towards natural building principles, because our modern houses are basically plastic bags filled with carcinogens.
Totally.
And there's a pump on it that brings fresh air in and out. And if the pump goes down, your house is unlivable.
But even then, like all the toxic glues, and now
it's terrible.
Yeah. I mean, my wife and I have started looking into, because we have a house that's built in 2022 that they're using spray foam, and there's a lot of evidence that that's extremely toxic. So we're like, God dang it, man.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Well, it's like my parents built the straw bale house in 2008, and it's one of the most beautiful homes like you've ever been. And it's like, it's not fancy, it's just simple, it's functional, it's 1,000 square foot footprint, but it's we go through plus 40 and from plus 40 to minus 40, which would be like 120 Fahrenheit to minus 40 Fahrenheit in our climate, and we heat it with a wood stove, and there's no AC unit in it.
Wow. Is that you grew up without AC?
In our old house, yeah.
Oh, in your old house, okay.
Yeah, we didn't have AC in our old house or this one, and again, the way that you design buildings, they can heat, cool, and power themselves.
Yeah. If
they're designed properly. If they're not, you forevermore you have to pump the septic out. You have to bring fresh air in. You have to cool it in the summer, heat it in the winter, versus just by putting the windows in the right angles, the right sizes, or as I say, the right scale, time, placement, and form, or the right amount of the right thing at the right time in the right place. For 1,000 years, that building takes care of itself.
Yeah, actual intention into the building instead of just these subdivisions where all the houses look exactly the same.
We'll put a giant glass window facing west so that every evening the house cooks.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so then that was structures. Now, next one.
Fencing, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, basically once you get your water ponds, your dams across them, and your buildings placed, then it starts to become apparent, okay, where the permanent subdivision fencing go? So for sure there's going to be one around the perimeter for whatever appropriate species are, whether it's, your domesticated or if you're trying to keep deer out, it'll be an appropriate perimeter fence. And then typically the subdivision fencing will follow waterways, because you don't want your animals in the creeks or in sensitive areas like that. And ideally you want to have the least amount of subdivision fencing as possible, because one of the principles of rotational grazing is you want to keep it variable. If you've got a fence in the same place every year, it's gonna change their grazing patterns.
How do you deal with rabbits and things like that, though? Because like that's the issue in our yard right now. Yeah. Like last spring, not this spring, but the last spring, we grew like 30 melons in just like 2 raised beds, which was incredible for like just 2 raised beds. But over half of them were eaten by rabbits. And I'm like, okay, we should have put chicken wire. But then I'm thinking about the second, third order effects of that.
Yeah. And so this is where, like, in nature, if you try to take a grizzly bear's food, he's going to rip your head off.
Right. Exactly.
There's nothing wrong with defending and protecting the resources that you invested.
How do you do that though with fencing while like still being mindful of creating permanence in the place?
Totally. So with that, you might want to have, like, is there a way you can do a perimeter fence around your property that works for rabbits and any other predators, but also stacking functions works to keep chickens in. So it keeps predators out, chickens in, but also it's a trellis. So you're growing grapes or hardy kiwis or passion fruit or whatever it is on the fence, but it's also there to slow the wind down so that, your gardens aren't getting ripped to shreds when you get your seasonal winds, and just all these little things. And you start to get to the point where one of the goals in a good design is every single element will accomplish, 3 or 4 functions just by nature of where it's placed in the landscape. And it's really fun to get these things, and things click together. Like the process that I use, I say I'm not designing the properties are designing themselves. I've just found a way to kind of talk to the land, and it literally is like that pond has to go there, the house has to go here, the dam has to go there, the fence has to go here. And
it really is like an art. It's an art.
It's an art, but there are rules and principles that guide it. And I think you mentioned like a Buck Filler quote. One of my favorites of his is that a design is finished not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away.
Wow.
Yeah. There's another one, which is there's nothing in a caterpillar that would let you know it's going to be a butterfly.
What do you take that to mean?
So it's like basically this is the nature of complexity.
Okay.
Is that like it's the, two things are greater than a synergistic system is greater than the sum of its parts.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so these properties have their own emergent characteristics that even the best design in the world could have, if you design it right, it will evolve into something you could have never predicted.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's another quote from a Canadian architect. His name is Bruce Mao. He says, if outcome is what's driving the process, we can only go to where we've already been. But if process is the driver, we may not know where we're going, but we'll know we want to be there.
I love that. Wow. That's beautiful. Have you seen, this is a rhetorical question. I'd imagine it's yes. Otherwise you wouldn't be saying that. You've seen this happen on your own farm.
100%.
Where like it took off to be things beyond your wildest imagination, things you couldn't even conceive of.
So I'll give you an example. There's a pond, and this is one of my most popular YouTube videos, is I think it's like how I feed my raised milk-fed pork on my farm or whatever. And it starts with me pulling duckweed out of a pond, which is like a floating plant that's 40% protein, and it literally grows off of the waste product of my chickens and pigs. And so when I first built that pond, all I was thinking was, okay, I need to build a road through this wet spot. I need clay to build the road. The pond's going to give me clay. Then I get a pond. It's positioned really nicely, so it'll act as a storm retention basin for all of our roads. It looks beautiful because it's the centerpiece in our yard. And I was like, totally, the pond has to go there. I built it 2 years later, and I planted some plants, brought them in. I had this duckweed stuff, which I didn't know what it was, on a neighboring pond. I brought it in, threw a handful in, and then like the next day, like it covered the whole pond. I was like, oh no, what have I done? Right? Because I was still at the stage where it's like, is it going to invade and take over? And anyways, like the next day, the chickens were like reaching out into the water, eating it. And I was like, that's pretty cool. What is this stuff? So I started doing research. Yeah, it's 40% protein. You can feed it like 50% of your diet to chickens or pigs, and there's no loss in production. And the only thing it needs is warm, shallow, nutrient-rich water, which is, I literally positioned this to be as like a stormwater catchment for my corrals. So any nutrients that the chickens or pigs have, or the cows, every time it rains, a river of manure runs into this pond, grows a bunch of duckweed, and then I feed it back to them. Wow. And like, I had no idea that pond was going to have all those functions. But like when you do the right amount of the right thing at the right time in the right place, nature grabs hold and does it better.
Wow.
And it keeps evolving. And like, even to this day, I was like, now I'm going to put a greenhouse over top of it so I can, grow duckweed longer into the season. And it's just, there's dozens of those things. When you get it right, the system continues to evolve. Nature wants to be more diverse and more productive than it was the year before.
Wow. That's so cool. Just over here smiling, like imagining myself on your land watching this take place.
Yeah, come for a visit, man.
Yeah, I really want to, man. This is not, it's really easy to be sold on this, for sure. Like really, really easy. Yeah. Okay, so structures, and then after fencing, and then what's next? Flora.
So this would be like the tree systems, gardens, pastures, cropland. If you're doing timber plantations or food forests or whatever it is, those will click into the landscape around everything else to kind of fill in the blocks based on, for example, like if for every 1 degree your land faces south, you gain 2 days of growing season because hot air rises, cold air sinks, and there'll be frost pockets in the lowlands, and it's windy at the top, but right in the middle, there's this beautiful microclimate. And so it's like, okay, great. Find those in the landscape. That's where your, plants that you're trying to grow that are maybe just on the edge of where your growing zone is, they'll go there. And so like on my farm, there are apples and plums and pears and stuff that can't grow in my yard right around my house because we placed a lot of our infrastructure before I even heard about permaculture. Like my parents built their new house in 2008. I didn't learn about permaculture till 2012. So I kind of had to fit stuff around afterwards, but
still works though.
It still works. And every year or almost every year, we lose something in the yard to a late frost. up on the, in the thermocline or in this microclimate, they're fine.
Wow.
So you want to find those ideal microclimates in your landscape, put the plants that are going to grow there. And the next one is fauna, it's animals. So then it's okay. Now, what kind of animals are appropriate for your ecosystem? Not every property is suitable for cows. Not every property is suitable for ducks or chickens. And so you want to literally look, it's like, what are the other animals that are growing here just naturally without any work? And how do I find analog species? And this is true. It's true for plants as well.
Mm-hmm.
Find what's growing there with zero effort. Find analog species and help them grow better. So
what's so tough with that though is because human beings have decimated so much of what's naturally occurring. Is how do you even know what's naturally supposed to be? So
sometimes you have to go back and do historical analysis, which is
like bears were on the Great Plains, like in Kansas at one time.
So the analog for a bear is a pig.
Okay, got it. Okay.
And if you've ever tried to take a piglet from a sow, you'll know why, because they are ferocious animals.
Yeah.
They've got a monogastric, and like literally like bear fat, indigenous people in our area, if they can't get bear fat, they use pork fat to make all their indigenous meals.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So
so that the buffalo would be beef cattle, the deer and, sheep would be the sheep and goats. If you've got a lot of wild ducks, maybe look at domesticated ducks. If you've got lots of, grouse or prairie chickens, or maybe that's your chickens or quail. Like the land, it literally tells you.
Yeah.
Figure out what people were doing there before, apply some of these new principles of design efficiency. And
based on your knowledge, what grows well in this area in Texas, Central Texas?
In this area, the aquaculture would be a massive one. Like Chris and I were just out for a walk last night and saw these beautiful turtles in the river, and like turtle soup used to be a massive thing. Mark Twain writes about it in American history. And, there's all kinds of fish that you can grow, crawfish. You can design whole ecosystems of aquatic animals that are based off of the same principles of like a food forest.
Wow.
Say where you've got like the emergent or the high
sea forest,
the high trees, the medium, the low, and the ground covers. Like you'll have bottom feeders, mid feeders, top feeders.
Wow.
The turtles will go out and grab grass, and you can literally design a whole ecosystem that produces all its own, food, that balances the populations. There's so much stuff that we can do. This would also be Texas was like a savanna ecosystem, so grasslands with sparsely planted trees like the oaks, which have been fantastic fodder for all the wildlife. So that's what I'd be doing is, in the wet areas, aquaculture systems, some kind of silvopasture or savanna type ecosystem where you're planting strategic plants or strategic trees that drop fruits or nuts or pods in your dry season to help animals better utilize grass. They help you can grow 20% more pasture if you have proper shade, because there's less evaporation, the temperatures are cooler. It looks beautiful.
I mean, we've already noticed that just in our little backyard that we didn't attempt to do anything this year at all. And just leftover seeds from melons that the rabbits had ravaged through last time have melons thriving in two of our beds. And we didn't really care to pull a lot of the weeds at this point. And the weeds, obviously, they're probably taking some nutrients from the natural, like melon plants in some ways, but they're also beneficial. I'd imagine that's not correct, what I just said.
No, it's not. It's true. Yeah.
Okay. But they're also beneficial in that they're providing like more shade for the plants to then grow. And we have like hardly touched them, and the melons are going crazy.
Yeah. So take a look at the, common, indigenous style garden was the Three Sisters. So corn, beans, and squash. So the corn was this tall thing that grew, really high. The beans would climb up. They were fixing nitrogen. The corn was providing a trellis for the beans and providing a bit of dappled shade because it likes full sun. The beans like a little bit of dappled shade. And then the melons or the squash was growing in the understory of that. And that's how the indigenous people used to garden. And so that same principle of, different heights of plants they're not competing with each other. So you could literally take, 100 square feet of corn, put 100 square feet of beans and 100 square feet of squash right on top of each other, and you would get the same or better yields of each one of those crops, but they're growing on top of each other.
That's what we're noticing right now, because last time we pulled a bunch of weeds and they still grew pretty well, but they're growing just as well, and we're having to do less with all this stuff growing on top of it. It's pretty incredible.
Absolutely. And there will be competition. Like if you plant two plants that are taking up the same niche in an ecosystem, they will fight, and the stronger one will win. But as long as your weeds aren't competing with whatever it is you're trying to grow, then they're a companion plant.
They don't seem to be. They seem to be working really well. Okay, so we got to flora and fauna. So what's next after that?
Flora, fauna, a business.
Okay.
So yeah, business it doesn't apply to everyone. If you don't want to run a business, I would say you should, because of the tax incentives of being able to literally build and maintain a property like this with money that would have otherwise been stolen from you. But yeah, it's figure out what your land wants to be, help it become that, and then find the intersection of that of like, okay, what's a need that's lacking in your community? What do you like to do? Build a business around that and provide value for people. And it could be one thing, it could be a dozen things. But yeah, it should be appropriate to what growing, corn on irrigated land in, Idaho is not what that landscape wants to be. There are places where corn and annual crops were designed to grow. It was in the floodplains of massive rivers, which have natural deposition cycles. There's lots of fertility there. That's where grain was first domesticated in Egypt, was along the Nile. It's not meant to be grown, or if it is, you need, takes really special care, so that you're not, creating suffering and the system's going down. So yeah, figure out, what your land wants to be, what you love to do, what your community needs, build a business out of that. But again, that all comes like downstream from everything else, because everything else will dictate what your business has to be.
Yeah.
If you go into a swamp and be like, I really want to raise cows here or sheep, and it's like, that's not what the land wants to be. Change your goals to match geography, or change your geography to match your goals. Then the next piece would be technology. So this is like equipment, tractors, your solar panels, any technological tools, material capital, things like that. And the reason I put it so low is like, you can buy or sell almost any of the material capital in a day. Don't get bogged down in what color tractor you're going to buy when you first buy your. I feel
like people typically look at that first.
They do
that, and where I'm putting my house.
Yeah. Versus I would say is like, no, come up with the whole design first. Figure out what you're going to need, and also, can you design your property in such a way that whatever technology you're using is only a temporary input. So you can design a property so that eventually you won't need a tractor. Well,
that's what I was going to ask you about your property. How much technology input do you even need at this point? You talked about like 1 year using diesel a little bit, and then that's it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we still have tractors, we still have equipment. We're still in the building stage of building back our ecological capital. But eventually, like for example, there's a farmer in my area who only fed hay for, I think it was 9 days last winter, and we get to minus 40. Like most people are feeding hay to cows for 8 months out of the year. So, we're probably around the 4 to 6 months, but every year we're reducing how much hay we feed, which reduces, the balers, the tractors, the fuel, all that other stuff. Another example is like, we put in a lot of water piping to bring water all across our landscape for irrigation, for livestock watering. Eventually I'm going to have springs and creeks everywhere. I won't need the pipes. So in 1,000 years, when that plastic finally degrades or whatever, I won't need it anymore.
Incredible.
So the last piece is soil.
Okay.
And so soil health is like the hot topic in regenerative agriculture right now. Everyone's talking about.
Interesting that you have it last.
So it's not in terms of importance. Soil is incredibly important, but if you get everything else wrong, you can lose 1,000 years worth of soil in an hour rain event.
Yeah.
And everyone's seen it. But if you get everything right, you can build 1,000 years worth of soil in a few years. So that's why I put it last, is that it's easy to change. But if you get everything, if you're trying to grow the wrong plants and animals on your property, if you don't get your water system right, your soil doesn't matter. So everyone's so fixated on the finger, and they're forgetting that it's the moon that it's pointing at, in my opinion. And again, soil health is so critical. But like for example, a lot of these regenerative farmers, they're focusing on how to build their soil health on a feedlot. And it's like, you can't, like, you're always going to be fighting nature. There are no feedlots in natural systems.
Mm-hmm.
There are huge densities of livestock in one area, but then they're moved the next hour.
Yeah.
They're not there for 50 years, shitting into the same rivers and causing, the dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico.
Would you advise someone like that? Like at this point, if you don't have enough land, you probably should not do what you're doing with cattle.
I would start to transition out of it. And again, this is not a judgment of, like, if there are industrial farmers out there. My parents used to do it, and again, I will say there are pastures on our soil on our farm today that are worse than our fully chemical neighbors, because that's how bad our land was degraded. Because even though we were organic, we were still selling 10,000 pounds of hay a year off our farm, which was literally mining the soil of nutrients. So the key piece is, like, where do you want to go, and starting to make holistic decisions on a day-to-day basis on how to get there. And it might take us 100 years to get out of the mess that we're in, or we could do it in 10. I don't know, but I don't know what we're going to do, but I know we're going to want to be there when we get there.
Okay. So that was 11, right? 11, 12. How many was it? 11. Okay.
Factors,
11 factors, order of operations, not one being more important than the other, but like to consider putting yourself on a homestead.
Yeah. Which ones are weighted? They're harder to change, or they take longer to change.
Makes sense. Totally makes sense. So what comes up for me is that sounds extremely overwhelming for one person to tackle themselves. And it brings up, like you mentioned, and you have a strong community around you. You guys are like sharing materials. I'd imagine, like, we have a surplus of this type of berry. Do you want some of this? And then you give me some of your, like, more of whatever you have that I don't have, type of situation going on, which is incredible, because I feel like that's what our community, being the health and freedom community, wants to sort of shift back to, that way of living. Because again, that's just another way we make the system obsolete. So all that to say, what is, in your mind, like, how important is the communal aspect of living this way and beginning to transition to living this way?
I think it's huge. And this is why whenever someone's asking, like, where should I buy? It's like, who should you buy beside? Because if there already is an established community or someplace that has roots, and you can, that is like-minded, and you can move into that existing ecosystem that's there, you'll be years ahead. In the same way that it takes 100 years to grow a forest, it takes time for people to settle in an area, get accustomed with what are the plants and animals that like to grow there. And there are ways you can pioneer into that, but it takes time and resources, and you're going to make mistakes. So for sure, like, getting established in an existing community is easier, but also going forward, like, I'm under no illusions that we're going to go back to a barter and trade society that's, like, primitive. Like, I don't want to do that. I love the technology that we have in our society. I think it could be a lot better. And so, like, we're not going to just be an agrarian society where everyone grows food. There has to be specialized people who, like, the blacksmiths and the bakers and the bankers and stuff like that. Those are all valued.
Or even people who make these devices.
Absolutely.
That people are watching the show on.
That's incredibly valuable. But I think we're at a position where, like, and we saw this during the lockdowns, like, they were, like, one degree away from, you don't get to buy food unless you have this in your body.
Right.
It's really hard to bite the hand that feeds you.
Right.
When you can't do that. And so
it's either that you get enough people en masse to say no to that, to force change within the system through non-compliance, or you get enough people to exit, or somewhere in between. And that's where I think the homesteading piece is just like, walk away. Let's not petition or pout or protest. Like, I'm of the mind that if a private property owner decides that in order for me to enter their store, I have to do certain things, they have every sucks
right to
say that, but at the same time,
they have that right. And I have no right to enter on their property. If it's quote, public property, that's a more convoluted thing. But there shouldn't be public property in the first place.
That's why I was like, I'm over here like this. Public.
But so that's why I think the homesteading piece is, not everyone's going to be able to do this at the scale that we're doing it. But I think everyone can grow a garden, which changes changes you mentally, physically, spiritually, like just interacting with nature, seeing that being part of the miracle of life. Everyone should do that. Some people will have the desire and the means to do this on a larger scale, to provide that kind of bedrock for civilization of the parallel society that we're trying to build to sprout off of. And that will be a lot easier in a community setting. So, like, for example, on our farm, like I live, right next door to my one sister and her family. They don't own any tractors. Because whenever they need one, they can come to our farm and grab one and use it for whatever they need. And so that just frees up them to have, $500,000 worth of equipment that they don't need to pay anything for, other than whenever they have a surplus of something in their garden. Like, that kind of exchange is effortless. Mm-hmm. The same thing, the new property that I bought had to be within 15 minutes driving distance with back roads, so I could get all the equipment from our current farm to my new property. Because then again, I don't have to go buy $500,000 worth of equipment. It's already there. And so we kind of have this nucleus around our farm, and then we're trying to encourage people to buy, like-minded people to buy land around us, so we can build that hub, because then we can start to specialize. No, you don't worry about growing the grain or being the blacksmith or being a carpenter. Like, I'll do that. We can start to trade, and that can be, harder to trace for the government bureaucrats, which further reduces your tax burden. It helps us to we're not fighting the system, we're just making it obsolete.
Right. Making it totally irrelevant.
And so absolutely it's massive. Now, I will say of all the reasons why homesteads or these fail, it's because of community.
Really?
Like the social piece is really hard. I've worked with so many clients who it seems like too good to be true. They've got this wealthy landowner who wants to bring them in and fund everything or whatever it is. And the dynamics aren't right, and people's feelings get hurt. And after 5 years, it blows up, and it's just ugly,
this is the thing that I've thought about with. Sorry to interrupt, because I've thought about that so much. Even if I were to go onto property with some of my friends, are you an advocate for having your own distinct property that is adjacent to someone else's?
I do.
Yeah, I feel like that has to be.
I think it has to be. I don't think the commune model works. But living next to each other. So basically, it's specialization. So you're living next to each other, but one person's a banker, one person's a carpenter, one person's deals with the home insurance side of things. Like, we're going to need all those things. What happens if your house burns down in this parallel society? If you have 1,000 people that are each putting in $1,000 a year into their insurance plan, that's a lot of money. You could rebuild the house every year.
Yeah,
pretty easily with that. We need that service. That's a full-time job for someone. I'm really good at farming. That's one of my vocations. Not everyone is going to be good at that. So let me specialize in that. We produce enough food for 50 people right now. That frees 50 people up to do something else that I can't do. That's how we build the parallel system. Now, part of that transition is we're at this messy stage. Like, I give the analogy, like you're in an abusive relationship with your partner. There's still some good in them, but you can't fix them where it's at. So you got to get away. You can't be in that toxic soup. And I think, exiting, not fighting, leaving, creating your own little sanctuary as a nucleus and starting to build off of that, I think is one of the first steps that we're going to work through, especially if you have a productive business already that is transferable into the new world that we're talking about. Stop paying 50% of your money to the government. Buy a farm as a business, dump everything into that. And then you're defunding it by starting another business and making it available for, even if you're not going to manage it, maybe
you just created jobs for other people.
You just created jobs for other people, and now you've got food security. Now, the next time that they try to close the world down, it doesn't matter. You've got your own private farmer that can feed you and 50 other people, and then we start to leverage. And now that allows you to specialize in more things, and it will be this upward spiral that we have no idea where it's going to go, but we're gonna want to be there. So yeah, community is absolutely key, but it's not going to be this socialist. Like, so many people want to live in community because they have no skills, and they think that
leech off of other people.
And it's not like a conscious thing, but if you're in a position where you man, I have nothing to offer society, I better buddy up to people who do. That's a shitty mindset to have. You should be working as hard. How do I produce something of value that other people are going to want in the future system that we
maybe
have?
That's step number one. Even before the 11 steps, it's hold on, what skill do I have?
Totally. And in the book, like step 0, there's a 5-step process. There's step 0 is like change your paradigm.
Yeah.
And it really starts with investing. Is like, there is so much brainwashing that has been put towards getting people to think that humans are a cancer on this planet, and that we'd be better off if we went to Mars or we all died from some, virus or whatever. It's like, if you believe that, or even if you've like taken in a little bit and it's just like a subconscious thing, like you can't do anything.
No.
If you think that the world would be better without you here, the only ethical thing you can do is to kill yourself.
Mm.
So you need to look at that paradigm and realize that human beings can be just as regenerative as we are destructive. Yes, we've done some shitty things in the past. Those have been largely because of the fact that we've been slaves and we're fighting in the prison that a few people hold the keys to. Let's stop fighting. We don't even need to fight the prison guards.
No,
we just need to walk away.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. But you have to want it, and you have to know that you deserve it. That you deserve well-being. That you don't deserve to suffer. And there's so many worldviews and even religions that are built around the purpose of life is to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And what a useful thing to teach your slaves.
And there's such a distinct difference between suffering and just having to work hard for something that is worth it.
It's very different. It's very different. And this, if you choose to do this, it'll be the hardest thing you've ever done. It will be the most enjoyable thing and the most meaningful thing you've ever done. You will not call it suffering or a sacrifice. It will not be that.
Yeah.
It'll be an investment. It'll be a vocation. And that's subtle. That's a paradigm shift. But that is what will set you up for success before anything else. And then once you have that mindset, and then you engage in community with other people who have that same mindset, who aren't trying to leech off of each other, but they're trying to be, I want to be the most productive version of myself that's really good at this one thing first. And then I want to trade with other people who are the best in their class. Like, think of that versus, well, you owe me this. And like, because I was born with this victim mentality, then like, it's just a race to the bottom in that case.
Right.
And it's not to say that there hasn't been suffering in the past and injustice. Absolutely. But the way we get out of that isn't to pick a new boss. It's to say, no, let's going forward, mutual consent and mutual benefit for all our relations for all time.
I'm going to find what I'm good at, be as self-sufficient in that as I possibly can. And any holes that I have to plug, I find community of people around me that can plug in those holes.
And that, to be honestly, is probably one of the outside of, seeing a new bird that I've never seen before, trading with, a fellow producer for something that they've put their blood, sweat, and tears into. And like, they're so happy to get the thing that you've produced and poured your life into, and you're so happy to get. It's like, that is not just a 1+1 exchange. That's a whole, that's syntropy right there.
Yeah.
And it's not a zero-sum game. It's really beautiful versus in our current economy. Like, whenever you buy something, you know that it's a piece of shit and it's probably going to give you cancer and who knows. Like, it's just like, I'm buying this because there's no better option. And because the bureaucrats have passed so many laws that it's impossible to buy a vehicle that isn't going to break down in the first 6 months. It's like, what would it be like if someone could, like, you build a tractor? Like, one of the tractors I have has over like 1 million kilometers or 10,000 hours on it. It's from the 1970s. It'll last for another 1 million kilometers. They've basically done nothing to it. And it gets done. It's perfect.
Incredible.
But the tractors today they're constantly in the shop. Because it's designed obsolescence. Why? Because the market's controlled.
Totally.
And it's all inspected and certified by the bureaucrats. But as long as you check these boxes, and there's no incentive to produce something that's better. There's only incentive to produce something that's going to break, because that's where you make your money. And just let's leave that system behind. And it's illegal. It's illegal to have raw milk. It's illegal to grow the kinds of grains that I feed to my animals. Everything that I do on my farm is illegal. But
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's moral though. It's the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah. The more that we can get people doing that, I think the tide really is turning towards that direction. I think that's the thing, is people are now caught up in the how. And that's why I'm glad we talked about the how on this. And what I love that you shared there is that it doesn't require that you go buy freaking 100 or plus acres right now to shift everything. It just requires that you start taking small steps, and it really makes it simple. It's so much more simple than people make it out to be. Because like, people are always asking when I point out the illegitimacy of government and the nonsense behind voting and it's all theater, et cetera, et cetera. Like, oh, well, what's your solution? I'm like, first off, look, the idea that I can know the best solution for you is absurd. Yes. Can I share ideas? Yes, absolutely. That's why I do podcasts like this. So we can give people ideas so that they can form their own unique solution.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing is first it requires a mindset shift, which is why I love that you said step 0 is a paradigm shift, because what drives actions is a change in thoughts, feelings, and beliefs.
Absolutely.
That's what drives actions.
100%.
And you'll come up with your own solution, right?
Yeah. But if you believe that the weeds and the viruses are out to get you and that you're one of them and there's no solution that you'll ever find.
Right.
But if when you break free of those paradigms, just the solutions are endless.
Yeah.
And another strategy, like you're saying, not having to buy land, is like go work for an existing farm.
Yeah.
And don't go volunteer, because most farmers hate volunteers because it takes them way longer to train them so they don't kill half the stuff that they got on their farm. Take whatever money you're putting into your gym membership, pay that to a local farm and be like, I want you to train me. I'm really keen on this thing, or find some other win-win that they're not sacrificing. And it's really hard because there's a real martyr mindset in farmers. But that can be another way that you can start to skill up. And like one of the guys in our company, that's what he did. And he's got tons of skills. He still lives in the city, but he works on other farms. He's running tractors and doing all this stuff.
That's cool.
Because he found a win-win relationship with a local farmer. So there's so many creative things that you can do beyond, getting in over your head with some of the stuff, buying land and again, if it sucks, you're stupid.
Yeah.
It should be fun. It won't be. It's not that it'll be easy. It'll be hard, but you should feel progression towards a goal, that your well-being is improving.
Well, a friend of mine, Steve Falconer, he has a pretty big garden in Denmark, and he was dealing with frozen shoulder.
Yeah.
And he was just gardening barefoot after a few days, I think, and his frozen shoulder went away. So you talk about the stacking functions and benefits of just being in your garden and moving your body like that. There is
totally. Well, what's the G&M for what shoulder was it?
I don't know which shoulder it was. That's an interesting question. I should ask him which shoulder.
But it's funny because I think coming back to that is a lot of your illnesses, quote, will disappear when you start to live like this, because there's so many conflicts. We're living in conflict with God or nature right now in our society, and that has downstream effects.
Absolutely.
And so when you shift, I honestly think a lot of the reasons why, people, when they start eating organic and they start gardening, it's not necessarily because there's not chemicals on the food. I think it's because of the mind shift of being a part of this system that feels gross. That's where your IBS is coming from. It's because you can't stomach it, right?
Right.
It's not necessarily the Roundup, which I'm sure has an effect. It's because that there's Roundup and you're part of this shitty system. And take some steps out and
yeah. I think that's really interesting too, because I've thought about how my wife and I, since we've adopted this lifestyle, moving more towards a natural way of living in alignment with God and with nature, is that we tend to be more sensitive to things when we're not. Yeah. And I don't think it's that it's right in line with what you said. I don't think it's that we're more sensitive. I think it's that on a metaphysical level, we know that we're in conflict because we have the awareness now this way of being is not correct. And we're at a point of still transitioning away from that. So the more that we have to engage with those things that are not in alignment with God, the more it impacts us metaphysically, which manifests as physical symptoms, either like a conflict, adaptation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So there's a saying that, necessity is the mother of invention. I say that drudgery is the father of design. So it's that feeling of this sucks. How do I make it better? And it's that iterative thing. And so listening to that, this doesn't feel right, is one of the most powerful senses that we have as an organism. And every other animal and bird, a wild pig in the forest, doesn't do things that suck. They're the happiest thing. You see a deer prancing around, they get eaten by bears and they have, they have bad times, but they're on a whole, they're not suffering. They're just full of joy. And I think that's what human beings have the potential to do on this planet. And
amen. So well said.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to hear now about all that you have going on with your companies and what you guys offer.
Yeah. So and basically 2 years ago, myself and two of my best friends started building your homestead. And our mission is to help people get transition away from the current system to build the parallel system one homestead at a time. So we can do that through, helping you to, if you don't already have land, how to find it, how to design it, how to develop it. We have ongoing mentorship packages. We've got free resources. We're working on, I do have a course that's available, that's based on the book. But I will say, like, most people wouldn't design and engineer their own house. And in that same vein, most people shouldn't design and engineer their own property. Like, even if you're going to be the person to manage it, like it is a skill set. Like you said, going through those factors, it's complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated. And that's where the piece that one of the things my team are trying to specialize in is that helping people to design and develop land anywhere in the world and provide them with the mentorship so that they can succeed going forward.
Amazing. So all the things that we just talked about over the course of this episode, you help with that essentially. That's
what we do. And if someone wants to be their own architect and engineer, we've got a course for that. That'll walk you literally step by step through every piece. If you want us to...
Steep learning curve, though.
Yeah, it's a steep learning curve. We say there's good, there's fast, and there's cheap, and you can pick two.
Okay.
But we also have clients where we're literally helping to, like, we help them find land, we're helping them to design it, we're helping them to match them with a land manager so that now they have their own, basically, they've got a private chef and they've got a private farm manager that is going to produce food and developing business models like that. Or if you're the manager or the owner of the land and you want to be doing all this work, we can just be kind of an advisor in your corner that's helping you to manage trades. We're getting into the stage where we can actually act as general contractors on the build out of certain projects. We're working on that locally right now, but I do think there'll be a time very soon that we'll be able to do that more remotely with the way technology is going. And our hope is to continue to build our team out. So right now it's just the three of us and some contractors, but we want to have more, homestead mentors so that people that already have that background skill set of the nitty gritty day-to-day management stuff, they can become a mentor for someone else who's just getting into it. And we can start to pair them up with someone who's in the same region, who has the same values, in a similar skill set. So yeah, that's where we're not quite sure where it's going to go, but we're using a process and we know that it's going to be somewhere we want to be.
What was that quote again? You're not really concerned with the outcome.
Yeah. It's don't focus on the outcome, because if you do, you can only go to where you've already been. If you focus on process, you might not know where you're going, but you'll know you want to be there.
Yeah. Fall in love with the process, man. Wow. This is awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Takota. This was great. This was a long time coming, and I'm really glad that we got to do this.
Thrilled, man.